Okay, says we're live. I'm going to make sure that we actually are on all of the different places because this is first time. This is the first time I've dual streamed in years. Okay, we're on
do
Twitch.
It every week. Hi everyone out there.
Good.
Hopefully it's dual streaming like a boss.
Yes. And we're on YouTube. Awesome. Okay. Everyone in chats, please let me know if y'all can hear and see us okay. We should be all good, but we're not going to waste any time because there is so much
to do.
Yeah, there is so much we're going to try and cover this episode. It's not even funny. So hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to Lorebeards. This is super exciting. We are just doing a full lore episode dedicated to Malekith. We're not doing any of that real world BS. We're just going straight Warhammer lore. So without further ado, thanks to Andy so much for being here. You're on this side. Andy, so much for being here. I do want to give a quick shout out because it's literally what I was doing right before the stream. If you haven't, please go check out Lawhammer. They are doing a lot of Warhammer Fantasy lore related stuff through Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. It's insane. I just finished another of the Tales of Ubersreich and like, oh my God, the bombs that keep dropping.
Do enjoy the good old Tales of Ubersreich and Lorehammer in general. Do make sure you do pop by us if you like your Warhammer fantasy played out in a role-playing environment, because it's freaking awesome, if I do say so myself as GM.
Yeah, and I agree very much as literally just a viewer. So yeah, no, it's amazing. But in any event, we're here to talk about one particular character from the Warhammer Fantasy Universe. Today, we are doing Malekith Deconstructed. So me and Andy were kind of just shooting the shit one time randomly and kind of throwing around ideas, and Malekith came up, and we both kind of talked about that Malekith in a lot of ways is kind of one of the most important characters in Warhammer Fantasy.
It really is.
So it was like, of course, we should do a chat on him, because when me and him start talking, time passes very quickly.
We kind of start, and then it's 5 hours later, and we're just sitting there going, should we hang up? Should we hang up? We should probably hang up.
Yeah, so we're just going to jump right into it of Malekith the Witch King, kind of talking about various topics that are involved with him. We are not going to do what we might do in the future on some other characters where we like break down their history, because Malekith's history is so fucking long that we really would not get, like, I sent Andy what I would call like the most abridged version possible, and it was like just a paragraph of text of like, here's all the things that I think could be important, and I skipped a shitload.
He's a funny old character, because there's parts of his history where maybe 1,000 years pass and stuff is happening, and so little details in there. 1,000 years worth of what? And yeah, super fascinating character because of that.
Yeah, so that's probably the number one thing to deal with, kind of right out the gate, is Malekith is old. Like,
yes,
it's easy to kind of forget how old he is, but like I think he is the second or third oldest living elf still alive. Not including like Kalidor, Dragon Tamer, and all his buddies cheating in the Vortex.
That's just
yeah, because they're more stuck in time as opposed to actively participating. So that's probably the most important thing to kind of kick off with is Malekith. I want to say he is somewhere in the ballpark now of what, like 8,000 years old?
Is it that long?
Let's see. The Great War Against Chaos ended. Oh no, I think he's more like 6,000.
Yeah, that'd be a little bit closer. You'd be looking at around about 6,000.
Yeah.
The only reason that's fresh in my mind is because I've been dating out for some other characters from my own game, and yeah, around about 6,000 plus.
Yeah, so looking at kind of the challenges about that, especially like dealing with the character's impact on the setting and challenges for writers, is that we have Malekith, who's born very close to the end of the Great Incursion, which that's probably where we actually need to start, is the Great Incursion. So chaos comes into the world.
It's actually about 7,000.
7,000?
Yeah. I'm still counting in my head.
You're all good. You know what? I could be. I literally have like. I was like, I'm gonna make sure I have all my books next to me just in case I need to reference anything. But probably the most important thing to start with is the state of the elves when Malekith is born and his parents, because they have a insanely dramatic impact on what he becomes later in life. Because Malekith, as we all know, is kind of very much a product of his parents, in that he's kind of one of the last quote unquote true elves. before they start being kind of dramatically impacted by everything that happens. So
by Malekith.
Yeah, so probably best to start with Dad, because he's a little bit more of a he's a slightly more contained story because he does us the favor of dying relatively quickly. So Anarion.
Before we begin, can I just add one little extra detail as well?
Go for it.
Malekith is not only old in terms of the character and where he started in the setting all the way 7,000 years ago, he's also old in terms of the overall setting as well, given that he was brought in during the Dark Elf army list for 4th edition Warhammer. And the Dark Elves back then are very different to the Dark Elves that we have today. Very similar in many ways. But all the way back then, there wasn't really this great pantheon of elven gods. There was pretty much just a couple that they ported in from 40k, kind of almost, which actually originally came from Warhammer anyway, and were then ported over. And Chaos gods. And because of that, the influence of Chaos on the earlier Dark Elves is stark, heavy, and never really went away because of that. And when they added in all the extra gods and all the extra complexity that came with the darker side of the elven pantheon, that never really sunk in properly into how they wrote Malekith, Marathi, and all the rest on the long term. So if you're looking at the overall characters and the gods that they have, then you'll find that there's a lot of holes there that have been papered over and have been sort of covered to a degree, but they still bear to this day the original stories that were written all the way back to the original army list, which very much are heavily Slaanesh dominated, without any real impact from the wider pantheon. And Malekith himself and his mum and all the stories that work around that are really quite different to the stories that they probably told if they started telling them now, because they would have had a far stronger influence from all the Dark Elf side of the pantheon. If you look at those. But that all said, over to Anarion.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. But and there are subjects we're gonna hit where we're gonna have to really talk about how Malekith fits in because it gets a little weird. But so yeah, Anarion the Defender, the big bad first Phoenix King. Because a lot of people may not necessarily know elves when they were just elves. There weren't any breakdowns. You know, they got set up on Ulthuan. They literally had paradise given to them by the old ones. The old ones, the Slann taught them magic. They literally learned from Lord Croak and like all these other really important things. And they were a very matriarchal society. They had the Everqueens going back further than even the elves remember. But they didn't have kings. They just had the Everqueen. And life was a lot more chill. And then the demons came and things got really bad. And the elves in particular were caught in kind of a worse situation than most anybody else, because the humans were kind of able to scatter into the forests, the very early humans, scatter into the forests and the mountains and hide away and stuff like that. And they didn't really have like big civilization that the demons were drawn to. The dwarfs fled onto the mountains. Obviously the dwarfs had a really, really bad time, but you know, they dropped a mountain and sealed themselves away, and that worked for them. The elves didn't really have anything to protect them other than the ocean. And when the Lizardmen did a really good job holding chaos at bay for a really long time, like thousands of years, but eventually they got pushed back. And the Lizardmen retreat to Lestria and were like, good luck, because what else could they do? So the elves, which, I mean, they literally paradise. So think of it, there was no war, really. Like they were hunters, the elves. They had like hunting spears and bows. They weren't really super complex. And then chaos hits them with like a steel hammer and things get really bad. So
I'll add in a small extra detail in there just to give a slight aside as well. And that's that if you look at the elven stories from that time, they don't mention really the Lizardmen at all. And it's worth always balancing out individual species beliefs with the overall picture as well. Where when they look back at their history, as far as they were concerned, the gods, they are the children of the gods, and their mother was speaking to them all the time, Isha, doing the thing. And as far as they were concerned, they were blessed by the gods, given this holy, beautiful paradise to play with by the gods. And then the gods fucked off. For reasons. And they have their own individual beliefs for why that occurred. The Lizardmen obviously have a very different set of beliefs for why that occurred. But what is certain is chaos came and really fucked with their party.
Yeah, and there is, and we just don't have time to get into it, but one day we will have to do an episode talking about gods specifically, because the elven gods are easily one of the most fascinating things of like where do old ones and elven gods intersect? But they're clearly not the same thing, but they are kind of the same thing. But they're also very much not. But like, there's a whole thing there. Anyway, so Anarion, he is the easiest way to kind of TLDR him. The too long didn't read for him is that Anarion was a fairly gifted leader and warrior. He wasn't anything like too amazing, but he was good enough that he was able to get maybe some small victories, but the demons were ultimately just annihilating the elves. It was not going well. And really, the only thing that kind of saved the elves in those early days was that Slaanesh seemed to kind of be the dominant force going after the elves, Nakari in particular being kind of the overall general. And Nakari liked playing with his food. He was very slow, and they were having fun as opposed to trying to wipe them out. And Anarion goes to the gods, who have seemingly abandoned them, and basically begs to Ashurin, the king of the gods, to intervene, to get involved. And he hears silence. And he makes animal offerings, he hears silence. They do prayers, they get silence. And Anarion finally just reaches his limit, and he throws himself into the flame of Ashurin itself at the shrine of Ashurin, the holiest site where Ashurin's power is supposedly physically in the world. And he literally dies. he is burnt to an actual crisp, and he full on dies. But after he dies, his life kind of resparks, because I guess that wasn't, and I'll allow Andy to really expand on this, that seemed to be enough for Ashurin, or at least to get Ashurin's attention. And
I'll add a little extra detail.
Yes, go on.
Since you asked, this wasn't the first time it happened. It's actually detailed in a relatively old roleplay book that the gods themselves, as far as the elves are concerned, sometime previous, before they left the world, were at almost exactly the same place as what Anarion was several centuries later. And that's what, basically the Chaos Gods had defeated them. They were fleeing the world, and Azurin was dead. And then the gods retreated up his pyramid, and then Azurin returned to lay waste all around and told the remaining gods to flee the world and never return again. So the concept of Azurin dying and coming back was already a thing. Anarion casting himself into that flame, in some respects, was repeating what Azurin himself had done previously, killing himself for the greater good of his people in the hope that Azurin, a god who had been completely silent, they all thought possibly was dead, yet his flame was still burning, and was their only hope of survival, and turns out he was.
Yeah, which Ashurin, the Phoenix, very heavily wrapped up in all that.
Phoenix's rebirth.
Yeah. So Anarion comes back, and he's not just Anarion anymore. He is Anarion with literally most, or at least a significant amount of Ashurin's power in him.
I think a good way of looking at it is look at, as much as this may be heresy to say for some, is look at the end times material. And look at how effectively some folks around the Warhammer world became avatars of various gods. He effectively became an avatar of Azurin in a similar fashion to what, say, Ariel was or Orion was over in the wood much, much later, in that they were avatars for certain elven gods. And at this point, Anarion returned as an avatar of Azurin and leadeth the waste.
Yes, so he starts kicking the crap out of the demons. He's doing really, really well, but there is the ultimate problem, which is that Anarion can't be everywhere at once. And if there's one thing Chaos has going for it, and that it has going for it throughout the entirety of Warhammer Fantasy's narrative, and I think the history of the game as well, is that Chaos is endless. It is, you can't really effectively kill it without getting into some really crazy scenarios. So while Anarion could keep beating the demons, and he would maybe even beat them badly enough where he'd win a small amount of peace, there'd be like a 30-year peace or a 50-year peace. Ultimately, the demons would always come back. And eventually, when Anarion, and this gives us time enough where Kaldor Dragon Tamer starts exploring the world, and he starts like learning, he meets the dwarves for the first time. He meets, Grimnir, and they have their little exchange and all this stuff where Kaldor learns that the demons are coming from the very far north, and Grimnir learns some other shenanigans, and they go their separate ways, and yada yada. But this builds up to when Anarion is not able to be where he needs to be one day, his wife is killed. The Everqueen is murdered and killed by Nakari, the biggest baddest of the Keeper of Secrets, and it's believed that his children are killed as well, and Anarion loses it. understandably. He's pushed to the brink of despair, and the way he breaks is that he decides to go full nuclear weapon. And he goes to the Shrine of the Widowmaker, the Shrine of Cain, where he draws the Sword of Cain, the Widowmaker, which is canonically, to my understanding, the strongest weapon in Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, that was, depending on which story you believe, perhaps the weapon that Cain had made for him to literally kill gods during the earlier War of the Gods, where the Chaos Gods had beaten the
War in
gods
Heaven,
back, as I mentioned before. And this is reflected over into 40k lore for those of you who know that as well, because there was quite a lot of bleed between the two during the course of particularly 4th through up to about 7th, maybe 6th. And then they sort of split them again. But there was a lot of bleed in that period. And it is worth saying that it was probably the last of the 100 swords that Vol had made, the one that was the proper god killer. And it was bluntly awful. Absolutely freaking awful, and was the weapon that probably slayed a bunch of gods during an earlier period, if you believe in the elven divine aspects that are put forward by, say, for example, Fenrir in the Book of Days.
Right. So this is where we really start actually getting to Malekith related stuff, is that Anarion, when he draws the sword, he changes a fair bit. Drawing the Sword of Cain comes with a lot of consequences, which Anarion was warned about repeatedly. There's actually a really, really cool audio drama, if any of y'all are ever bored and want to listen to, that's literally about Anarion going to draw the Sword of Cain and all the different gods like whispering him, telling him not to do it. Palador telling him not to do it. Everyone's telling him, no, don't do this. Like it's going to be bad. But he decides, screw it, I'm going to, because he wants to just kill chaos for revenge. So he draws the sword, and yes, it makes him unstoppable, literally unstoppable. But it starts to also have some really bad negative effects. There's actually some really interesting stuff in the Liber Chaotica about what, where a character posits the idea, what happens to a mortal when you stuff two gods, essentially the power of two gods, into one soul. Yep. And the answer is not good.
And it wasn't just poor old Anarion that was doomed, it was his entire line.
Yes,
that was it. It wasn't arguably just Anarion that was doomed, it was his entire species for having the temerity of doing this. And the curse was something that was whispered in his ears, as was mentioned all the way through, and he picked that up. Admittedly, in despair, good old elves, as we know, have far higher, stronger felt emotions than almost everyone else. So when we're thinking, oh no, he's a bit sad, he's not. He's completely out of his mind. He's on the edge of insanity already. When he draws that weapon, he will listen to nobody, because he's gone beyond that point. There's a reason that Slanesh loves chasing down those elven souls. They're super tasty, because of all the emotions that they feel and bleed through into the aether over into the other side. And that was it. It's doom.
Yeah, and he's 100% right in that the Curse of Cain is a bonkers, like it's a powerful weapon, but it literally comes with like it wasn't a secret to Anarion either. He just didn't care at that point. Of it doomed a lot of that. It at that moment had a irreversible effect on the entire elven race, because he kind of essentially signed a contract by drawing that sword, and it really screwed up anyone descended from him. And introduced like an unavoidable flaw, which is what the Curse of Cain is known as in universe. Like it's a known thing to the elves, where we'll talk a little bit more later, but like in later generations, those that are descended from Anarion have to essentially be inspected, at least among the Asur, to make sure the Curse of Cain is not presenting itself in too dangerous of a way. Which, like, there's an implication that if it did, they would potentially kill those children, which is terrifying. Because the other half of the Curse of Cain is, while it comes with terrible penalties, it also grants insane power. Like all the descendants of Anarion have problems, but they also are amazingly gifted at something.
And what's particularly interesting about that is, yes, there's the inspection tales, but there is literally no example of any child ever being, let's say, killed, just to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's almost like it being mostly on the Azure side, a power play. It's an attempt to control. It's an attempt to politically maneuver their way around what is potentially the most, let's say, famous bloodline that the elves have, because this is the direct bloodline of their first Phoenix King. And every other princedom out of the 10 kingdoms are going to be going, keep those people down. It's quite likely, for all there is those dark tales that sit around it, are they killing them? They didn't kill a single one. It was just nothing more than a method of controlling this extraordinarily politically powerful line that could rise up and potentially push them all aside.
Yeah, and that's a point that's actually really well made in the Tyrion Teclis omnibus, of that. You really get the feeling that it's not as much about, oh, we're worried about this thing, like this child becoming a horrible murderer. It's more about, we're worried that if this child has very strong, like, political ambitions, that could threaten us. Yeah. And the Asher, like, God, like, when it comes to politics, the Asher are like head and above the other elves, which is saying a lot because other elves are already crazy. So this is where we get Anarion, Malekith's dad. Is after he's drawn the Widowmaker, that is the man who will become his father. And it's worth talking about this point, that one of the really awesome points brought up kind of in the Liber Chaotica, but it's I think worth exploring at this point, is that Anarion, like the original Anarion, his personality, his emotions, everything essentially gets crushed beneath these gods. Of that, if you were to meet Anarion, he probably wouldn't even feel like a person. Because he's more like a puppet of Ashurin and Cain, who are very much wrestling for control and don't like each other. Ashurin and Cain are not friends.
Yeah, I think that a really good way for you to try and imagine this, if you're looking at the overall setting and at the characters you might know better, take a look at just how different Orion is from a normal elf. How massively different Orion is. Now, this is someone who's obviously carried his particular, let's say, divinity for much longer, and it had slowly but surely manifested in different ways. But nevertheless, the King of the Wood, or indeed the Queen of the Wood, enormously different from the elves over which they rule. In the same fashion here, Anarion just was not a mortal elf anymore. It was something quite beyond anything any of them could really understand. And after that swordy business, became someone known for his bouts of anger, his odd court, and, well, good old mum to be.
Yeah, so with his family now dead, and the other thing is, Anarion was very isolated at this point. Calidor leaves. Like, Calidor was his best friend, his advisor. And Calidor full on abandons isn't the right word, because I think for Calidor it was like a mental health thing. He literally couldn't be around Anarion anymore.
Yeah,
because Anarion. Because Anarion set up his court in Naggareth, and the court of Naggareth was notorious for its cruelty, and it's a very dark, horrible place that none of the other elves like to go visit. And the Dark Elves of Naggareth become a reflection of Anarion. You know, they're around him all the time. They embrace his way of life because the elves love him. Like, he is a great hero, but other elves are kind of like, ugh, like that Cainite side of him really starts to shine.
And I think it's worth noting here, to what I said at the beginning of the stream, how the dark elf gods, as we come to know them, are dismissed through this entire period in most of the write-ups. But really, if we look at it, and if we were writing it again, this is where we would deeply dive into everything that is the dark elf deities and what they came to reflect in Naggareth. Because the society that they built up was just all of those gods, and they were ignoring a huge chunk of the gods that lay atop. And they had a very different opinion as to how elf society should represent. But at this point, it wasn't, this is the only way to be. This was just how we are, and you can be how you are elsewhere. But this is how we are, particularly because Anarion himself was very much prone to, as we know, bouts of, let's say, Cain stuff.
Yeah. He is, like, although he's very much seen as a hero and stuff, there are little bits, if you it's actually kind of surprising how much reading between the lines you have to do for it. But Anarion is like borderline abusive to the people around him. Not intentionally per se. It's more like he loses control and does some horrible stuff when he loses control. But so this leads to his isolation. He's completely alone, essentially. Like, he doesn't have any equals or anyone that can really hold his ear. And yeah, sure, he's slaughtering the demons, but Kalidor is now obsessed with trying to find a different way to end the war because Anarion has settled for the status quo. He's like, he can't just go up and fight the dark gods and kill them. So he's really just kind of defending. He rides out, fights the demons, and then retreats to Anlek and broods in his fortress. So then one day he defeats a particular chaos army, mostly of Slaanesh demons, and he saves Morathi. We don't know where the hell Morathi came from exactly. At least I don't off the top of my head. The only thing I remember is that she was a Cirrus. Like she was gifted with prophecy and magic.
Potions in particular, when you look at some of her first descriptions, because throughout the course of the early war against demons with Anarion, after he had picked up the sword, she was responsible for caring for him when he went into the worst bouts of madness. She was the one that prepared the potions that helped him calm down and helped bring his court into a state of balance, so to speak. In many respects, you could look back at it and say that Morathi was slowly but surely taking control, or alternatively, if you want to take a different reading of Morathi, you could easily see that she was in love and she was trying to help him. She saw this great hero. This was her one great love, and she was attempting to take him through what was, quite frankly, an absolute catastrophe for the individual man. Because for all he had taken on these godlike powers, he was not just broken, he was breaking further. And Morathi was the one that stopped him breaking. So for all, it's very easy to look at Morathi and ascribe immediate, oh, she was this and she was manipulative and she was all these things. It's just as easy to say, without her, the elves would have died. Because Anarion himself would have fallen completely.
So one thing I think it's interesting to kind of answer, because it's very much left up in the air, is what. So we know Anarion like finally fully notices and kind of meets Morathi when he saves her from the demons of Slaanesh. But kind of the question that the lore kind of posits, and it definitely seems very much from it like the High Elves being like, was she there because she had been captured, or did she want to be there? Like, had she made a deal with the demons, which we know she does a lot later, and like it went sour? Was she legitimately captured, or was she in control of the situation and used it to meet Anarion?
Yeah, and that was never answered, and I think that's very much probably never going to be answered by Games Workshop unless one day they decide to do so, because they are wont to doing that. But I think leaving it a mystery. Yeah, leaving it a mystery in many respects makes it better, because then that adds this air of mystery around Morathi in general. A pawn, or perhaps a manipulator, or perhaps completely different, someone who was just caught up in the events completely. We all know that later on she does get wrapped up in the cult of pleasures. But again, is that nothing more than the classic dark elf manipulation and use of what they see as contemptuous chaos powers? As far as they're concerned, the chaos powers are nothing more than something to be used. They're something to potentially be afraid of. For example, one doesn't want to get eaten by Slaanesh, but that doesn't mean that you won't use them. And indeed, that is very much reflected, as we'll go on to later when we discuss, say, for example, Nakari, who effectively becomes a slave to them.
Yes. So they become married rather quickly, and their relationship is actually very fast and furious, especially by elf standards. Even by human standards, it's actually not, it's not brief. Like, you have this war that's lasted for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The time between Anarion's, the Everqueen dying, and the end of the war is only like 30 years or something like that. It's very short.
It skims by in no time at all.
Yeah. So Morathi, from all sources that we have, at least kind of the more modern sources, I don't know about the older lore, she is like super head over heels for Anarion. She loves him genuinely.
I'll jump in on this one, because they've jumped on different ways on this one, because Morathi's character and Anarion's character has changed over time. To begin with, it was pure speculation, and it was history so far back that no one can be sure, and it's nothing more than the myth of their relationship, then counterbalanced with the reality of what Morathi is today, and she's hell. And so it's very easy for the historians to look back and say, well, Morathi was completely manipulating him from day one. We High Elves, we're the best, and she was the worst. Where that story adapted into, no, she was head over heels in love. And I think to a degree that's run all the way through to Age of Sigmar, where still Anarion pops up. She's like,
Yeah. Oh my God, it's
Helgi! Or alternatively, look at the end times when, oh, wait a minute, Tyrion is nothing more than my husband reborn. Woo! And she goes mental. Now, is that necessarily the one way? That looks pretty clear cut to me. On the other side, they also dirtied up the relationship with Anarion to Marathi, where to begin with, it was clear her beauty completely enthralled him. He was head over heels in love, but that sort of got muddied up when they started going, well, perhaps it was the Sword of Cain that made him start thinking these things, that made him accept her where he wouldn't have done previously. Was there any real love there? Was there anything at all inside that cold, dark heart of Anarian's? And I think that in some respects, they almost destroyed the romance with later parts because they realized that some of it didn't really support the Marathi that they had built, where she was a proper monster, forgetting that there was 7,000 years of difference between those two characters, 7,000 years worth of failures and hatreds and loves and ups and downs that can change a character, not just slightly, but fundamentally. And you'll find, I think it was it Blood of Anarion, the book by William King? I think.
Yes.
I think, as I recall, it's been a while since I read that one, but they very much dirtied the water there and very much said,
so that was about that's what I was about to say, is that in that book, it's flat out stated that Marathi very much loves Anarion, but it's Anarion. The way they kind of paint it is that Anarion loved his first wife. He lusts for Marathi. Like he kind of fills that void left behind by his first family dying with her. But because of like the influence of Cain, he's abusive. Like it very strongly implies that like Marathi kind of makes excuses for it, but Anarion beats her a few times, or like he's an abusive husband. Because he just has these, like, not all the time, but he just has these explosive moments of anger. And Marathi kind of fawns over him and excuses it, but you know, it's kind of this unhealthy dynamic. And there's this really important scene where Anarion finds out what Calidor is going to do. He finds out that Calidor is going to create the vortex, which Anarion told him not to. Anarion hates the vortex plan. There's a lot of really cool stuff in Liber Chaotica about how Anarion might be very heavily influenced by Asherin and Cain, who might like that they have a physical presence in the world, and so the vortex would be kind of bad for them. So they might not totally be on par with that plan, whereas maybe the original Anarion would have been, but he's getting, you know, suppressed if he's even there anymore. So Calidor goes through with the plan anyway. He doesn't tell Anarion, he goes through with it. Anarion finds out as the demons are coming down on top of Calidor, because they find out what he's doing and they're like, oh shit. So Anarion has a split moment decision where he has to decide, does he go support Calidor and defend him for the vortex, or does he leave him to die? And Anarion's pissed at Calidor. Like he's raving. And Marathi tries to convince him to stay, because she has enough prophecy and enough wisdom that she knows, she's seen the future, that if Anarion goes to the vortex, he's going to die. And there's no avoiding it. And she begs him not to go. And he's like, you know, he's kind of on the fence about it because he's angry. And she tells him, you know, we can manipulate the powers of chaos. I've been delving into these secrets. I've been binding demons. I know things. We will survive. And one thing that I think is really core to Marathi's character is her obsession with survival at any cost.
Yeah, and I think also her obsession with Anarion. I think obsession, she's an elf, so clearly she's going to have a different set of emotional beginning points to us. So I feel almost uncomfortable saying obsession, because obsession is often tied close to unstable mental health. But I think from her perspective, she's just an elf and she is completely in love. And her man is going to walk off to his death. And if you want to see an elf who clearly is not working from the perspective of being just a bad guy, you could argue it's her, because she's really thinking about keeping her family unit, as it has been built, alive. And that's cool. But you could argue, and I think that some other later writers did always hint that she was being influenced by, say, Slaanesh, who did not want that vortex to go up. And I personally don't like that as a story. It is one that's most legitimately there. But I don't think it's the best story, because a far better story is to see what Marathi was and what she becomes through the various steps of her life, in the same way for Anarion, and in exactly the same way as we'll move on to with Malekith.
Yeah, which, speaking of which, Malekith has entered the story.
He's been born.
It only took us 30 minutes, but we got there. So
it's gonna be a long stream.
Yeah, Malekith is born into this environment. And Malekith is only born like less than a decade before Anarian's death, maybe a little more. But he's
I think it's a bit more because he's got memories of his father. So I don't think it's quite enough. I can't remember how long it is.
But at best case scenario, like if Marathi and Anarian got straight to business after they met, and like there was no time wasted, then Malekith at best is in his 20s. But I think it's implied that he's a fair bit younger than that when Anarian dies, because his memories of Anarian are very fuzzy. Malekith has a recollection. I want to say it's either in the Sundering series or the Tyrion and Tekla series, but Malekith does have some recollection of his father, but it talks about how he only remembers kind of like playing or sitting at the bottom of his father's throne and looking up at his dad.
Yeah, as I recall, I'm just running off the top of my head, I seem to recall that I built a timeline for this. I think he might have been as much as his 30s. But I wouldn't mind checking that up before saying that. In that I seem to recall, because we did a little bit about how old elves are in terms of their emotional development and how quickly they change. And yeah, I think it's 30s, but
yeah, it could be. It doesn't really matter. He's young. That's the important thing. He's very, very young. And so Malekith's burned into this. His parents don't necessarily. I would say it's fair to say his parents don't have the healthiest relationship.
They don't.
And Anlek is not a great place to raise a kid. It's not. It was a dark and shadowy place, kind of at the best of times. And I think they tended to revel in things that probably weren't healthy for little Malekith's development.
Again, not to be judgmental, just because I like to bring in a different angle if we can. It's a different morality, a different species. You could argue that as far as they were concerned, it was nowhere near as bad as what we, with our current moralities, would look in and say, that is unacceptable. I would say that the worst part of it all probably was Dad.
Yeah.
Probably Dad. Because Dad is he's like a drunken, abusive husband who clearly loves his wife, but is also often one raving about his friends, raving about what he perceives to be the enemies that should be his allies all around him, and then going off and doing things that he just doesn't agree with. He's the freaking king. Why aren't they listening to him?
Yeah, and we know that Malekith was not immune to elf propaganda. And also it's his dad. Like, Malekith loves his dad. And that's the most important thing to start with now that we're finally talking about him, is Malekith is completely obsessed with Anarian's legacy. And also just Anarian himself. And Malekith didn't get a lot of attention from his father. Like, there are a few scenes about Anarian and Malekith, and Anarian didn't really seem to talk to him a lot. Or like when he did talk to him, it was very he comes off very distant, which makes sense because he's probably not really all there anymore. You know, he's been wielding the Sword of Cain for decades at this point. He's had Assurin in him for way longer, and he's been through a lot, and he's probably seen some horrible shit fighting demons.
Yeah, he's broken.
So
he's quite a broken man.
Yeah, Malekith had a very cold relationship with his dad. Marathi loves Malekith, genuinely. Like, I don't think there's any. And she spoils him a lot too, especially back then. But Malekith looked up to his father.
I think it's worth just interrupting and saying that I think that a lot of that is also because of the way that Anarian was acting.
Yes.
She, in many respects, was compensating for this father figure that was distant and difficult and cold, and not just all of that, but also enormously impressive. He's saved their species effectively, and is in the process of being not just the first Phoenix King, but the first elf of awesomeness that ever awesomed. He's just extraordinary, and no one ever could live up to that, particularly when he's also simultaneously at home a bit of an abusive father, somebody that the court is terrified of, someone that Malekith will be looking up to and seeing the court and how terrified they are of his father and going, maybe this is the way that I should be. You can almost see where a lot of what he will become starts right at the very, very beginning, and his mother sitting at the side, desperately looking at her son and the effect that that man is having on him, loving that man, but also terrified of what this could mean for her son. Yeah, I could see that being a tough place to be.
Yeah, and it's also so that is to say, Anarion goes off and he dies. Now, granted, Anarion dies in one of the most epic things ever. There's a lot of different versions on who he fights, but the important thing is he fights literally the biggest, baddest greater demons you can think of.
Yeah, I think one thing that's worth adding here, just as a small aside, right at the very beginning, he actually kills a chap called Morcar, who was the big bad guy in Hero Quest, and was later cast as an ever-chosen that Sigmar kills, because they decided that there couldn't have been humans that were responsible for all of the attacks, and they changed it in the lore and just suddenly went, it was all demons. It was all demons that came through, where originally it wasn't. Originally, it was the hordes of chaos as we know today. So there was chaos warriors, there was humans all over the place, there was the equivalent of Cornate tech coming down with like big scorpion machines doing their crazy stuff. That changed in time and disappeared completely. So they couldn't have the first ever chosen Morcar there because there was no humans. It was all demons. And they completely changed the background. Having said that, though, they still kept almost all of the detail except that one last bit. Meaning that the stories, sometimes when you look at them and try to pick them apart, as say, for example, good old Loremaster of Sotek over here does, you start going, oh, wait a minute, there's a couple of holes here that don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's because they've often deleted some parts with a little bit of Tipex and going, yep, that didn't happen, neither did that, and neither did that. But they didn't refill it with something else.
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up too, because it is not unusual for people to run into that and go, wait, there's a Morcar here, and it's like, but Morcar doesn't show up for like another 4,500 years. But so yeah. And also one of my favorite artwork pieces ever is Anarion facing down Nakari, which is phenomenal and also inspired the version of Nakari we got in Total Warhammer 3, which I'm super happy about. But anyway, enough of that. So Anarion dies, and he dies literally in the most heroic way he possibly could have. Yep. And he sacrifices himself to save the world along with Kaldor and all them. But Anarion gets a pretty hefty lion's share of the credit because it was a lot more obvious what he was doing. Kaldor kind of, as far as everyone saw, Kaldor kind of vanished onto the Isle of the Dead, and then nobody ever saw him again. Not a lot of people got to dramatically watch him cast the spell, whereas Anarion was literally the fireworks show, facing off against greater demons, him and his dragon, and Anarion dies, but before he dies, he puts the Widowmaker back in the altar of Cain, and he vanished. The other thing that's kind of important about Anarion is he didn't really get a proper funeral because nobody found him. He literally just vanished, which is terrifying. And I don't even think they found his dragon either. Like, I think they both
Dragonir died as well. Poor old
and Dragonir did die, but it's like, I don't think they found their corpses. I think they were both just like poof. Which, probably some Cain shenanigans there, who knows. But so the two of them die, and so the elves are kind of left shocked and reeling because once again, Kaldor sort of sprung it on everybody. It was literally the fight of the apocalypse with no warning. When they had been fighting that war for a long time, because as much as the Great Incursion, Chaos showing up, was kind of an apocalyptic event, it also lasted a really long time, like thousands and thousands of years, which is a little bonkers, because when you read about it, it feels like, oh, this must have taken place over like a couple of years, and it's like, no, it takes place over millennia. But so for the elves, the war is suddenly over. Demons are gone. The world is much less magical. Magic is like sucked out of the world. And things are weird. They're quiet, and the elves start to rebuild. And
it's also worth making a small note here for those of you who are going, what was that like? Our elves are a deeply magical species. Imagine what it's like. One of the reasons why Anarion was so against it is because they drew their power from the magic that was inherently in the world. And to shut it all off suddenly means that all these extremely powerful wizards, mages, elves in general have now become diminished. They're now so much less than they were before. It's not just the dragons that get sleepy and go and hide underneath the mountains. The elves themselves are no longer what they once were. But uniquely here, the elves also have the vortex right beside them, so they're still bathing in that great swirl of magic so much more than the other species around the world are. But it is worth noting that for the elves, it was a massive change. They're just not what they used to be. And they end up, in many respects, trying to find ways to return to what they once were.
Yeah, and the other side of it is that Ulthuan as well gets like Ulthuan itself is never the same. Ulthuan gets battered by the creation of the vortex. Like we're talking tsunamis and earthquakes and all sorts of horrible shit. And Ulthuan takes like they literally take a year just to kind of settle, because it was so bad. But they get through it, and after a year, we have the first council, the Council of the Phoenix, where all of the princes get together from all the different kingdoms, and they decide that there needs to be another Phoenix King, which is interesting because there was no precedent for that. Anarion became the Phoenix King due to kind of a desperate act, and the only reason he gets called Phoenix King is because he takes on the power of Ashurin, but he marries the Everqueen.
And this is, I just have to say, this is one thing that I particularly hate. In general background lore, because it means that there can never actually be an elected queen. The princes always elect a man to rule over them, while the Everqueen sits over there doing the Everqueen bits, and there's no election there. There's nothing other than hereditary there. It means that if you are a woman in the High Elf lands, you have nowhere to go once you reach a certain level. None. Where all the men have always got the chance of becoming king. And it's just a thing that always sticks in my craw and goes, yeah, you can tell what sort of person wrote that one. They weren't thinking that one through completely. The unfairness.
You cap out at princess.
Like,
and man, there's a whole thing. I'm going
to
stop
myself from doing that.
No, you're good. Malekith. Okay. So they have the first council. And they gather together the princes, the leading prince from each of the kingdoms, who all are like trying to convince each other that they should be Phoenix King, because the High Elves love politics, just the elves. The elves love politics because they're not High Elves yet. And what's very present on everyone's mind is that Malekith is in the room, and Morathi comes with him. So it was also like their various thing, and they meet in the Shrine of Cain, or Shrine of Ashurin.
The right one.
Yeah, they meet in the Shrine of Ashurin on his little island, which is actually not terribly far from the Isle of the Dead, and they have some debates and stuff. And Malekith, I actually do agree now that I think about it for a second, with you saying that he's probably in his 30s, because it's only a year after Anarion dies, and he actually gives like a really important speech.
Yeah, he does. As I recall, elves generally don't reach full maturity till they're deep into their 30s, almost their 50s, until they're at full maturity. And he does give quite the speech.
So Malekith, and a lot of this is political savvy, but I think a lot of it is also genuine, because he does back up his actions. Where Malekith kind of comes out and he says, like, hey, we all know I'm an Aryan son. Some of you thinks that the title should be hereditary, but I want you all to know that I think we should elect whoever is the most qualified, and I will follow them without problem. Because there was a big fear among the High Elves, or the elves, that if they pick someone else, Malekith could turn around and say, nope, just like the Everqueen, this is a hereditary title, and he could start a civil war instantly. And a lot of the elves would have backed him.
Yeah, it's worth noting, though, that Morathi most certainly didn't.
Yeah, so they don't elect Malekith because some of them feel that Malekith is too much like his dad. They're worried that he's going to be too much of a warmonger. He's going to be too interested in fighting chaos. And it's no Malekith. Another thing we should probably talk about is that Malekith hates chaos. Even like many thousands of years later, I actually, despite a lot of people think Dark Elves, they're a chaos aligned race, but when you're looking at it from Malekith's perspective, he despises
he has
chaos.
Literally nothing but contempt for them. All they are useful for is the power that they can provide him, and nothing more. In many respects, much later, and perhaps largely because of the influence of his mother, he comes to the opinion that chaos is there to be used and destroyed. It is most certainly not something to be allied with. He ends up becoming a slave monger after all. As far as he's concerned, they're slaves to darkness, and he is the darkness.
Yeah. But in this younger age, like, I don't like, he's almost more purely of the eradicate chaos line. And it's like, definitely. They killed his dad. He took that very personally.
I think it's also worth noting something that's not said in the books, but most certainly, and I think should have been, but the writers just didn't put those two bits together. And that's He's a kid. He's on the edge of adulthood, on the cusp of it. A young prince, perhaps, but he is most certainly not capable of leading the 10 Kingdoms at this point. He is not a Phoenix King yet. He is potentially a Phoenix King to be. But one of the big differences between elves and, say, for example, humans is if he doesn't become Phoenix King, he might not become Phoenix King again ever, because he might die. I mean, it's possible if he dies in a battlefield somewhere. But realistically, for centuries and centuries and centuries. And that, I think, is what Morathi was railing against. The fact that what she saw as his rightful place was being taken by a bunch of mealy-mouthed, mewling political weasels who were taking her son, Anarion's son's, not just power, but birthright from him. And it infuriated her, and a fury that never really dies down, I think.
Yeah, and to be fair, Morathi kind of has a point in that, like, the elves had always done things hereditary. All of their titles are hereditary. The Everqueen is hereditary and had always been, as far as they could track back. This was the first time that there was an important position that was elected. Like, it's a pretty dramatic shift in elven culture, and Morathi is pissed. Like, there's like, if Malekith has to calm her down, like, she literally starts raving at the princes, and her son has to be like, "Mom, chill. You need to calm the hell down." And so they end up passing over Malekith for Belshazzar. Belshazzar, who is a prince from Tiranoc, ends up being elected because he's a little more scholarly, a little more prince. He's a little more. They want a peacetime king, and he radiates that peacetime king energy. So Malekith, it's important to note, Malekith is the very first person who takes the knee. Like, as soon as the election goes through, it's a very important part of Malekith's story that he is legit the first person that acknowledges Belshazzar as the Phoenix King, because he wanted to give he wanted to make sure everyone knew, I'm cool with this. We're doing this. Let's go.
And I think that this is worth pointing out for his character in general. It is very easy to look at Malekith, particularly when you look at the character he becomes and particularly moves on to in Age of Sigmar. Very easy to go, well, he's clearly the bad guy. But take a look at his actions, take a look at the things he did, and see how he became that character. To begin with, he most certainly isn't. He is the son of Anarion, and leadership qualities are shining from him from the very outset. He might have a mother who is perhaps very much a Malekith cheerleader, probably in Blood Bowl-esque fashion, and perhaps goes a little bit too hard about it, but she is under control in that he takes the step forward and he decides what the next step will be, and very clearly ensures that civil war does not happen. Because this is the first real potential of a break with the elves, and also the first potential for the curse of Anarion, the curse of Cain, has been said, but that curse from drawing that sword, a sword that may have cursed Cain himself as a god, for even wielding it back in ancient times. This sword is proper broken. It's wiped out his line, but at the moment, it's not manifesting in the slightest. The dude is sound.
Yeah, and it's, and once again, he's young at this point. Malekith, even, I think for the elves, Malekith would have been fully within his rights to be bitter or anything but there's really no indication that he was. Like, he takes it in stride, and he handles it really maturely. And this leads to the Age of Exploration. Belshazzar's like, hey, let's figure out what the hell's going on in the world. We're rebuilding Ulthuan, but we could always use more resources. And the elves have some pretty serious wanderlust. They really like to go explore, so they do. And Malekith,
I'll add a small extra bit on that about Malekith, because obviously he's a part of that. And it also, again, shows a deep level of maturity, because he realized that he would become, potentially, given just how political the elves can be, he would be a figure around which every single last thing that their current Phoenix thing did wrong could gather. He would be a political hot point. He would constantly be there as a reminder of the previous rule and just how effective Anarion had been at wiping out everything. He was their hero, and his son is there looking brilliant all the time. And Malekith goes, I can't allow that to occur. And he joins this Age of Exploration, which again has a deep well of not just maturity, but political savvy as well. And that's not with his mum telling him to do it. Again, at least not with any books that we've got so far. And I think that really does show a big difference that he has there.
Yeah, I would say, if anything, Morathi was probably upset that he left.
Oh yeah, probably.
Like
Because
Marathi doesn't want him leaving the nest egg, and B, he could, as far as she's concerned, he's sacrificing political ground by leaving.
Yeah, agreed completely.
Like
she's probably upset.
Yeah, and to Malekith's thing, I think he really wanted to, you know, he's of that age. He wanted to leave. He wanted to explore. He wanted to escape a lot of probably the shadow of his father in many ways and go make his own legacy, which speaks very well to him.
Yeah, it does. And I think it also speaks to when we look at the overall background and we're trying to figure out how it happened, not just the individual words that are done. There had to have been a conversation between her and him where he had to sit down with her and say, no, I am doing this. This is the damage that will happen if I stay here. I understand you want me to stay here because you want to inflict that damage, because you want me to be Phoenix King. And I don't think that that's appropriate at all. It's time for me to go, Mom. And Mom is all...
Yeah, I struggle to remember if this is the point, but I know either right before the Age of Exploration when he leaves, or he leaves for a while and then he meets her later, Malekith has a fight with Marathi where they shoot spells at each other and Marathi whoops his ass.
Well, no surprise. Because
he gets, because Malekith is a very, like, even from a young age, very, very skilled fighter. Marathi teaches him a lot about sorcery, but Marathi has always been a character who's very careful to keep the very best stuff for herself. She's very clever. And
I think will continue to outclass him until eventually he finds that circlet.
Yes, which we're going to get to in just a sec. But Malekith, like, he fights with his mother and he loses. And I think that, if I recall correctly, that also plays into him leaving. Is that he's very much trying to get away from his mother's control and wanting to leave a lot of what being the son of an Aryan is behind.
Yeah, so it's a complicated relationship, I think.
Yeah. So, like, he does love his mother, though. Like that, at least at this point.
I think it would be fair to say at no point does he ever not, even when she reaches the very worst of it, because she will always be the person that she was back then, as well as the person that she becomes. So there's some part of him that will never leave that, no matter how black and withered his soul may become, if indeed you believe that it ever does. Given that some people will claim that he was always playing the long game, which is definitely an argument.
Yeah. So now we come to one of the first really interesting points, as far as like things that influence Malekith that maybe are a little more weird, which is Malekith goes out to explore the world. And a lot of that is fighting against what's left of chaos. So yeah, sure, the demons are gone, but the demons left a lot behind. Beastmen everywhere. Thamir everywhere. Like the Thamir and the Beastmen are the two dominant species in most of the what we now know as the old world. The dwarfs were almost pushed back exclusively to Karasakarak and a few other isolated holds, and they take a while before they resurface and start exploring and expanding again. So, like, there's a lot of bad guys. Bad guys from an elf perspective, all over the place.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because this is a period where we definitely have proto-humans all over the place. We definitely have halflings. We definitely have ogres. We have all of the species that we will come to know, but they are so poorly detailed that we're never quite sure where they are. We do get lots of remnants of, say, sky giants up in the mountains, or this, that, and the other all over the place, or, as we'll go on to with our circlet, other potential societies. But they are very poorly detailed here. So if you're looking to expand into your own version of what happened, literally everything is out there. And we have entire dragons doing crazy dragon shit. We have lots of Warhammer species that we know are doing crazy stuff. And then who knows what's happening down in the Southlands, for example, or the Hinterlands of Koresh. There's definitely stuff out there that's beyond that. But the actual stories themselves barely touch them. They generally just go, yeah, there's chaos stuff to kill. Let's stop.
Yeah. Warhammer Fantasy, especially historically, is very much like Texas, where it looks big and you're like, wow, a lot of people live there. And then you go there and you realize like 85% of it is empty.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So anyway, Malekith starts exploring. He's fighting a lot. Like, they're fighting against the forces of chaos, and they recognize chaos when they see it. Elves have a weirdly good sense of telling when something is chaos affiliated, meaning like it's been changed by chaos. And the elves,
was there greenskins as well? I seem to recall.
Yes, so
facing up against greenskins.
Yeah, the greenskins start to resurge because when the demons vanish, there's a lot suddenly empty. Because we think like Be'lakor, the first demon prince, had an empire. Like, he had a full empire where he was worshipped as a god, and he was fighting with a bunch of other demon princes who had also established their own empires in the old world. Like, it was a land of chaos, ruled by chaos, controlled by chaos. And all of a sudden, poof, they're all gone. Everybody's gone. So, like, you have all these power vacuums because the demons have vanished, and everything that requires that much magic has vanished or stopped functioning. And so, flooding into this, we get the greenskins just boiling up. We get beastmen who now are able, they are no longer the playthings of the demons. They're now in charge, and they start hunting. Like, we know, we have some notes about how, like, a lot of the early humans can vaguely remember a time when they were hunted like beasts by the beastmen, because the beastmen were the dominant species. And we know the Famir, who were at one point the favored children of chaos, and in some of the more recent lore considered to be some of the earliest chaos worshippers. They're still a pretty dominant force in, like, a lot of the Fens and the Cold Mires and stuff. And then the elves show up as far as these guys are concerned, out of fucking nowhere. These ships these ships pull up along the shore, and all of a sudden all these pointy-eared assholes come off and start kicking everybody's ass.
Here comes the shining host.
Yeah. And so Malekith is considered like one of the best generals of his age. Like, he comes out
ass and chews gum.
Yeah, and he starts worming his way north. He starts fighting, going north, and he's just exploring. Like, he's just checking out what's out there, fighting monsters, killing epic creatures. Like, he's doing his whole thing. He's fighting, like, naval battles against, like, weird sea monsters, and he's fighting beastmen herds and all sorts of stuff, making a name for himself, and he's loving it. Like, he's loving the freedom. He's having a great time. And then he shows up at a weird place. We don't know exactly where, but it said in the distant north, he comes across a ruin. We don't know who the ruins belong to. It is a mysterious race that was civilized enough to have a lot of really power. Like, they had infrastructure, and they built this really weird city that has, like, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world, apparently. And Malekith explores it, and he finds an artifact that we now know as the Circlet of Iron. And he takes it, and he realizes that it's very, very powerful, and he puts it on his head, and he realizes that it gives him absurd control.
Ping, ping, ping.
Yeah, like, his magical power spikes. Like, it gives him amazing control over the winds of magic. And Malekith, a part of him knows that the artifact is probably not necessarily the most mundane or the most benign. It's not benign. Like, I think a part of him knows there's something chaosy about it, because it's magic. Like, they're very intertwined.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that here we can start pinging upon the arrogance of not just Malekith, but the elves in general. For all this artifact may or may not carry some sort of curse, it is quite frankly piddly in comparison to the curse of Anarion. The curse that was laid upon that big blade. It's nothing. And for someone like Malekith, who is now in the flush of what is effectively his late teenage, early 20s, he is full of himself. Victory after victory after victory, touring around the world like some sort of goddamn kick-ass king. And he arrives here and he finds something, and that, it's got power. This is a gift. And the old Lord of the Rings type fashion. This is something that has granting him access to perhaps the power that Kalador Dragon Tamer had before the Vortex was created. We're talking proper magic before it was dragged from the world, and suddenly he's found something that gives him access to this. And this also brings him up, arguably, to a par with his father. And if you're looking at some of this psychologies that lie behind it, this is something that perhaps allows him to finally become the Phoenix King that his mother tells him that he is, that he feels that he's supposed to be, but perhaps some part of him is considering, am I that Phoenix King? And now he's got access to power that allows him to become that. And that can immediately fill him with confidence and arrogance and a desire, not necessarily to take all the precautions he may originally have taken, but I think actually he probably did, because he's also super clever. Super clever. And maybe at the back of it, also a little bit of the, maybe my mum can't beat me in the old magic front anymore.
Yeah, and there's a note about the Circle of Iron in that the important thing to know about Malekith is that it's not like he didn't have magic. Malekith was a sorcerer before this.
Yeah.
His mom had taught him. He had likely started to dabble little bits in dark magic, though not nearly as much as Marathi did, because she kept a lot of that secret from him for a while. But he was a decent wizard. He wasn't anything like, he wasn't an archmage, but when he put on the circlet of iron, he legit becomes one of the most powerful wizards among the elves very rapidly, which also kind of has a poison to it of that he didn't necessarily he didn't walk the proper paths to attain that power. He just sort of kind of suddenly became insanely gifted with something that he maybe didn't appreciate the value as much as he should have. But in any event, he takes the circle of iron, and like Andy said, it's not like it corrupts him immediately. He actually is very careful with it. But his arrogance probably doesn't appreciate what it will have on him on the long term.
I think one way to view it is take a look at, say, for example, Ariel and her use of dark magic. It's very easy to say, oh, the Wood Elves, they've got themselves the dark and the light all slapped up together and they're fine. But if you take a look at how Ariel's often depicted, that use of dark magic over a very long period of time had significantly impacted many of her, let's say, decisions. And the corruption was exceedingly slow, and it was all effectively, them being elves, self-made. They're making decisions because of the power, the raw power that they have access to, and power by its very nature corrupts. So it's not just that the thing itself is corrupted. The thing itself, in some respects, is a metaphor for corruption because it is power. And by its very nature, it's going to cause them to corrupt because of the unearned power that it grants.
Yeah. And but for I saw somebody already asking, did the circlet make him evil? No, not at all, in the sense that the next thing that happens to Malekith is arguably one of the most wonderful things that he does in his life, which is that he meets the dwarfs.
Yep.
So Malekith, the elves. So if you've ever looked at maps of a lot of the old world, you'll notice that most of the old world's biggest, baddest cities are ports. And that's a lot of the time because they are built on top of elven ruins, because the elves established a whole bunch of ports because they were coming in from the coast and then very, very slowly moving inland. Because they, a lot of the times they didn't have necessarily the numbers, but the colonies start getting established, and Malekith is already considered a great hero by this point. He has defeated some insanely powerful forces of chaos, and while the demons had been mostly pushed out of the world, that doesn't mean demons didn't pop up occasionally. There were still beastmen war herds unleashing terrifying great rituals that would summon a greater demon, and Malekith fought some of them and beat them. And so he's practically worshipped as a great hero, and at this point he meets the dwarfs. They have first contact. There's actually a really hilarious note in the Malekith series about the first meeting between dwarves and elves because they can't talk to each other. They don't speak the same language, and it's I highly recommend the Sundering series. It's awesome, but that scene in particular is hysterical because the scene bounces between their perspectives and shows what they think of each other the first time, and it's hilarious. Of they don't think very flattering things about each other at first. But the dwarves and the elves meet, and Malekith is basically selected because he is by far the most powerful and worshipped of the elves at this point. The colonies. He's basically the king of the colonies. He's the de facto king of the new elven colonies, which, interesting enough, despite the fact Malekith does not intend it to be this way because he has no control over how it's being seen back in Ulthuan, is kind of used against the Phoenix King as a bit of a barb, of that Belshazzar's just sitting at home, not really doing anything. Meanwhile, Malekith's out earning all this glory and he's winning all these great victories, and all this wealth and resources are coming from the old world back to Ulthuan, and a lot of the elves are starting to go, maybe we messed up. Maybe Malekith should have been king because look at what he's doing. And Belshazzar's just sitting on his throne, politicking in the Phoenix Court all day, despite the fact that's what elves love doing. But it starts being weaponized against Belshazzar, and Belshazzar is keenly aware of it. But Malekith becomes ambassador to the dwarves, and he meets High King Snorri Whitebeard. And against kind of a lot of fantasy tropes, though I guess it also kind of leans into fantasy tropes of Malekith and Snorri Whitebeard become literally best friends. When I say best friends, I'm talking about Sam and Frodo, Gimli, Legolas levels of best friends.
Yeah, they're best mates.
Yeah, we're like some people who aren't as comfortable with themselves would look at it and go, "Are they like friends or are they friends?"
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I'd also like to add that back home that throughout this period as well, whilst Malekith is off being, awesome, back home, cults are rising all over the place in Ulthuan. The pleasure cults are making their first real steps into Ulthuan, and that's one of the things that weakens the Phoenix King's rule. Now, it's easy to say that those were all organized by Marathi from day one to undermine the Phoenix King and try and install Malekith in afterwards, but it would be equally easy to say that that's just one part of a far greater whole, that it's a very big, complicated set of affairs that involve not just Slaanesh, which is something that, because this bit's lifted from the very first write-ups about this era, but we now know that there's a ton of elven gods that pleasure cults don't just reflect in terms of Slaanesh and Slaanesh alone. They've got a variety of gods that reflect in elven
good old
society.
authority.
And authority in particular. You can't go wrong with authority. And those gods, in some respects, are being, at this point, you can see almost outlawed in preference to gods that match the current Phoenix King's preferences. And the court of Nagarythe, which is, in generally speaking, a far, let's say, more earthly bound, darker court than, say, for example, the court that might be running elsewhere. We're already beginning to get the divisions in elven society long before we actually break. It's already beginning to occur, and the pleasure cults in particular, where it all goes wrong, are rising, and Malekith's going to be coming back to talk about those soon.
Yeah, and it's very much worth. Once again, we don't have enough time to go into it.
Yeah,
we'll have to do a gods episode, but
gods.
Yeah, there's a lot of shenanigans happening back in Ulthuan because the Ulthuani elves are bored. They're safe and they don't know what to do with themselves. And thanks to what's going on in the colonies, they are inundated with wealth and everything they could ever want. And they start to turn to maybe satisfying some darker interests to find ways to amuse themselves.
And we all know Slaanesh love the elves.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really fascinating stuff there, but it's not directly related to Malekith right now, so we're gonna skip it for the moment. So the dwarves and the elves become very, very close, and a lot of that is because they have mutual enemies in the Beastmen, the Famir. They're one of the most big dramatic fights is actually featured in the War of Vengeance trilogy or omnibus, which shows what's called like kind of the final great battle, where the Malekith and Snorri Whitebeard are fighting side by side, and they're going up against this terrifying horde of beastmen that have summoned a bunch of demons. And we're talking like Snorri Whitebeard is dueling with a great unclean one, and Malekith is dueling a Lord of Change, and things are getting crazy. I still have this hilarious. There's this quote it's sad but funny at the same time, where this great unclean one literally like vomits all of this insane, horrible disease power on Snorri Whitebeard, and he's on the throne of power, so it kills the throne bearers. But Snorri's like, "Oh, that was nothing." Meanwhile, his throne bearers are like dying horribly below him, and he's like, "Get me close to that great unclean one so I can hit it with my axe." I love Snorri. But Malekith and him are absurdly close friends. They save each other's lives multiple times. And they are, to say that Malekith is a dwarf friend, knowing how, if you have any idea of how significant that phrase is, being a dwarf friend, that is not an idle thing. It's not just being a friend with a dwarf. That's like if another dwarf finds out you are a dwarf friend, that comes with some serious legal and societal things.
Yeah, it kind of goes beyond legal, doesn't it? This is something that's intrinsic to their character. It's right down to the very base of what it is to be a dwarf, the honor that comes along with that, and the fact that somebody has shown themselves to be Devonger, a dwarf friend. And it is deep, man. Sigmar will be getting the benefit of that for 2,500 years.
Yeah,
that's how deep it is. His empire still benefits from that to this day.
Yeah, and the thing about Malekith is I'm pretty sure this is correct, but I believe Malekith is the first ever dwarf friend.
It's the first one I'm aware of, yes.
Yeah, because the dwarves didn't really talk to anybody until they met the elves, and Malekith. Yeah, so I believe he is. And he's declared such by High King Snorri Whitebeard, who, to reiterate, High King Snorri Whitebeard is not just any High King. He is literally the son of Grugni. He is basically an ancestor god. Like, he's as close, which it's a little weird at what point Grugni's kids stopped being considered an ancestor god. Because Snorri is not actively considered one, but his siblings are. So I'm not sure what the rules were there, but
the whole thing around that is a little bit whim of the writer at hand as they realize or don't know a particular bit of lore. So some of them say yes, some of them say no. So it's really loose and it's kind of difficult to pin down.
Yeah, I would say that it's fair to call him an ancestor god, but I think
100%.
Yeah, the thing that's unique about Snorri is that after the war against the demons, the ancestor gods vanished. They all pieced out to what's known as the Glittering Realm, supposedly. So they all were like, "Hey, we'll come back when you need us most, but we're gonna peace out because there's less magic in the world and we gotta go." But Snorri stayed behind, and he became the first High King. But like the Throne of Power was made for him as a gift by his dad. Which is nuts. But so Snorri and Malekith are very good friends, and trade opens up between the dwarves and the elves. The dwarves are expanding into the old world. They're expanding into all the mountains. The dwarves are expanding into the hills. That we have the Scarinari at this point. You know, we have the hill dwarves who aren't around anymore, which we'll get into why. But like, you know, so like there are dwarves everywhere, there are elves everywhere, and life is great. Everything's awesome.
To look at the old world as we all know it today, the old world is basically almost a continent split between dwarves and elves, with whatever it is that's left to fight split amongst them. This is long before a significant population of humans is in the area, although you will find that several of them move in at various points with migrations, particularly later. There is definitely some Kiki around here at this point, depending upon which Warhammer writer you listen to, but the general consensus is up in the mountains, it's the dwarves. Down in the forest, it's the elves. And there's trade routes like a giant network spread across the lot. And the elves are almost at the peak of their empire. No other way of putting it. It's a proper empire where the dwarves are almost arguably a connected kingdom down the spine.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the elves are a global. They control the oceans flat out.
Totally. There's also one thing that's just loosely worth dropping. It's only like a couple of sentences, and that's that we never really get an idea of why the kings, the princes of the elves, choose a high prince, a high king for them, their effective Phoenix King. But if there was just the slightest contact with the dwarves, then you've got potentially one, because it was all the individual holds and one above them all. So there is a model out there already, and the chances that there was no communication with them at all, I think, is not just slim to none; it's none. That would have been known at some point in the past.
Well, we know Kalidor fought with Grimnir, so like he took a lot of information back with him, probably.
And there's your model. So if you're looking for a model where the elves would likely have been able to pick it up from, you've got one with the dwarves. It's already there. So you can see the politics that were imported, but that doesn't mean that their politics have anything to do with the elves. But that's an aside.
Yeah. So so at this point, this is when Malekith, some interesting kind of things happen, and there's a little bit of fuzziness here. So we know that and the reason this is so fuzzy is because it was a very late addition to the lore. It only pops up in 8th edition, which is that Malekith gets married. Malekith actually,
of course.
It literally, we don't know when he got married. They don't specify that. It seems implied that he gets married while he lives in the colonies, which would make sense. But he gets married to an elf seer called Alisara, who is a very, very, very powerful wizard. She is extremely gifted in prophecy, like one of the best prophecy elves of her time. And from all accounts, the two of them had a really good marriage. Malekith was on campaign a lot, but it seemed that when he was home, they genuinely were very affectionate towards one another. And she was kind of seen as royalty because they were royalty. They were,
as I recall, she's the sister of Ariel.
Yes, she is Ariel's sister.
And that, I think, grounds in just how much royalty they are. It also grounds where the relationship likely began. So you've got yourself someone who is going to be living out in the colonies, Ariel, her sister, Et al. Over in Athaloran, and you've got him who is ultimately an Ulthuan elf.
Yeah, I would not be surprised. We don't know much about Ariel and Alisara's family, But I would highly suspect that Alisara and Ariel's dad probably very much wanted Alisara to marry Malekith so a colonial family could have that tie back to, oh my god, the son of an Aryan and a Ulthwani and yada yada.
I also think it's very likely they're directly related to the royal line of Avalorn, because Avalorn and Athaloran, in terms of how they appear, are very, very similar. Particularly to begin with, there's tree men over in Avalorn. Avalorn itself is a forested realm. They move over to a forested realm, and that's where they ground themselves.
I mean,
it makes sense.
Yeah, Durthu hung out in Avalorn forever. Like he was there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the forest spirits of Athaloran, it said that Avalorn was literally their second. For some of them, they loved it more than Athaloran, which is wild.
So the chances of her being, for example, or both of them being of that line is very high, if not necessarily directly related, then perhaps the second generation from it, or alternatively, maybe a generation back, in that they are related to a line before the current Everqueen, or perhaps even one before that, but definitely from that sort of area. What we can be certain is, though, Malekith is the very height of royalty, and he is almost certain to be marrying somewhat similar, given the way that the nature of elven society at that point.
Yeah. So what happens from this point is that Malekith keeps going out on a campaign, and Malekith gets called home. Rather unexpectedly. Like Malekith is living life and he's basically his own king. And there is actually a lot of very important thing about the colonies. They acknowledge Ulthuan, but they don't really give a shit what Ulthuan's doing. And they're kind of resentful of the Phoenix King. Because they're out there fighting battles, they're out there taking a lot of the risk, and they kind of like ruling themselves. And every once in a while, an edict will come in from Belshazzar saying, you need to do X, or you need to do Y, or need to send back resources. Or Belshazzar actually does make an appearance in the colonies. He comes over to visit the dwarves officially. And he goes to Karasakarak and he meets with High King Snorri Whitebeard. He appoints Malekith as the High Ambassador. And Malekith is told that by Belshazzar, you need to come home. Like, we need you. There's stuff going on. Things are getting kind of ugly. We need
those
your
cults. Yeah, totally. Those cults are rising. You've also got to remember that the elves are hyper political. So when the colonies are sitting out there going, we don't like this, we don't like that, be aware the same as in Ulthuan. All of the individual kingdoms are doing exactly the same thing. Being the Phoenix King is a very heavy crown, because the people that you are leading are exceedingly difficult and exceedingly individual. And they're also exceedingly capable. So they will often look at, let's say, their king and perceive flaws everywhere, because it's not how they do it. God's damn it. So those colonies don't necessarily see them as particularly different to Ulthuan as a whole. The whole of the Elven Empire, which by this point now spans the world, don't just think of it as the old world. They are literally everywhere. On islands poking up all over the place.
All those towers you see on like the global map, this is when they build those.
Yeah, and they're sailing literally everywhere. And they are pretty much arguably the dominant power in the world at this point by a significant measure. There is nobody else who has not just the network of authority and control across the globe, but nobody else who has also that wide-spanning power to go wherever they want to do whatever they need to do. They are big stuff. And yes, Malekith is summoned home.
Yes, and two very important things happen to Malekith before he leaves, and they're both really bad and sad. The first is that High King Snorri Whitebeard dies. High King Snorri Whitebeard, now, he dies of old age. He was super fucking old for a dwarf. He's like multiple thousands of years old when he dies. But he does actually grow old and pass from the world. And to put it into words, I love the writing on Snorri Whitebeard's death because it's very emotional. But he banishes everyone from his bedside. And when Malekith hears Snorri Whitebeard is ill, he comes flying in like a bat out of hell to see his best friend. Literally his best friend. Malekith is not noted to have an elf friend as close as he is to Snorri Whitebeard, not even close. So he comes just hurtling in, ignores everybody else to come see his friend. And Snorri Whitebeard, when Malekith shows up, Snorri Whitebeard literally tells everyone else to leave the room, even his wife. He loved his queen, but he's like, I need to talk to my best friend. And Malekith is with him, and this is when Snorri makes Malekith swear an oath. And he tells Malekith to swear to him that he will defend everything the two of them built together. And Malekith, not duplicitous, being 100% genuine, swears a very, very deep oath to Snorri Whitebeard. And with that, Snorri Whitebeard's finally able to rest, and he dies. Like, he literally dies with Malekith holding his hand, and like, he dies. Malekith is the very last person that talks to Snorri Whitebeard. So Malekith announces to the dwarves that their High King has passed away. Like, that's how crazy that relationship was. And that's the death of Snorri, which is very hard on Malekith. Like, you think about how strongly emotional elves are, and this is a friendship that's lasted. Elves, it's like they do die of old age, but it's not very common.
And some elves, it's one of the big issues with Games Workshop writers is none of them really know. So you tend to find that there's a few different versions of what the state of affairs is. But generally speaking, it's elves live for a freaking long time, but once they reach a certain point, they generally require something to keep them going. The Dark Elves and let's say Malekith or Marathi very clearly have how they extended their life written in several places during the course of the lore. Worth moving into that potentially a little bit later, because elves aren't immortal, and they have a particular route that they take to ensure that they continue living. And that's a route that is quite different to, say, for example, the Wood Elves, who literally, their oldest ones are pretty much gods.
Yeah, and I would say it's not a coincidence that the elves that are insanely long-lived almost always tend to be wizards. The non-wizard
it's not a coincidence.
The non-wizard ones tend to die like they tend to live for like 5,000-6,000 years, but then they tend to peter off.
Not even that long. You'll find that some of them are dying. There's a few instances of some dying at 1,000. Not even that old in the greater scheme of things.
Caradriel is said to die peacefully in his sleep of old age, and I think he was only like 2,000 or 3,000, if that.
Totally. And the when we were sitting down to write how long do elves last, the general behind the scenes was you reach a certain point, and then effectively you're rolling dice every year to see if you die of old age, but it's a really small number, like 1 in 10,000. And every year you're rolling it, and you might die of old age, and you won't look old, but one day you might just go, that's it, this is the year I'm fading, and they fade out. But being elves, as is noted actually in one of the army lists, they might just go down and have a little nap for a century, because the winds of magic themselves can sustain elves, particularly if they're on the magical side. So even when they're dead, you can't be certain the little fuckers are dead. Because
he's like, I'm not dead yet. You are. Just keep shoveling.
But the general, behind the scenes, the general consensus was to live past 3,000, you needed magic of some form. You needed something to extend it further, or you're going to have to get something like Hellebrand and the nightmare that she goes through.
Yeah. So in any event, the second, so that's obviously very tragic, and that has a huge impact on Malekith. And actually, that does in a lot of ways chase him away from the colonies. There's a lot of heartbreak there, and that I think very much informs a lot of his genuine decision to leave. The second thing that happens is right after Malekith leaves, or it's either right before or right after, Alisara vanishes. His wife abandons him, and Malekith doesn't know why, and it really fucks with him. It really, really fucks with him. Now we know from Alisara's perspective that she sees a vision. She has one of her little holy visions or whatever, and she sees what Malekith is going to become. And out of fear, she flees.
Yep.
And she hides away from him, and then we'll come back to her in a little while. So Malekith goes home, and Malekith starts completely genuine. Once again, he does not know Marathi is behind the Cult of Pleasure. Like, he has a conversation with his mother when he returns, but they're not seeing eye to eye very well, because she's like, oh, look who finally came home. And he's like, yeah, I love you too, Mom. Bye. They're not on the best of terms at the moment, but he starts hunting down the cults of pleasure. And
it's worth iterating just how strong this is, because he comes back a hero, and he then looks at the problems that are besetting Ulthuan, sees it, makes speeches across Ulthuan, does the thing and says that not even his homelands, Nagarive, will be left aside for what is effectively his Inquisition. He intends to wipe them out to a man. And if that means that it goes right up to the top of power, then so fucking be it. And he is quite categorical about just how unacceptable this is, because we're not just talking about cults of the darker sides of the the elf pantheon. We're talking proper cults of pleasure. We're talking to Slaanesh, the chaos god itself, something that I think, as we've already established, not Malekith's favorite people.
Yeah, and Malek, when he discovers the Slaaneshi aspect in particular, Malekith actually gets genuinely pissed.
Yeah.
Like once again, I honestly do not think there are many characters that hate chaos, because like Malekith, while Marathi uses chaos, she doesn't really seem to feel one way. She doesn't hate them. They're more like, they're not even worth hatred.
It's contempt.
Yeah,
it's nothing more than contempt. They mean nothing to her. They're ants.
Yeah, Malekith actively hates a lot of chaos. Like he is not okay with the pleasure cults. The moment Slaanesh gets involved, he will stomp down on that so hard it's not even funny, because he views it probably in many ways as an insult to his father. So he ends up, and he does a very good job. And one of the things that ends up being sad later is Malekith actually becomes very close with Phoenix King Belshazzar. Like he becomes his closest confidant and advisor, and the two of them have a very genuine friendship. And Malekith doesn't know this, but Belshazzar begins to genuinely see Malekith as he should be the next Phoenix King. Like he needs to be leading our people. He's ready. And Belshazzar kind of starts making preparations, but Malekith doesn't know this.
I'd go further and to say that I think it wouldn't just be him. There would be a significant portion of the population by this point, okay, that has seen not just this great hero who went out and found himself, but has come back and is continuing to show what the best of Elvenkind can be. And that's just not, it's worth making sure that that's super clear, because as the lore will expand and change later on, there's a lot of doubt and let's say attacks made as to whether Malekith should be Phoenix King. But at this point, I don't think there would be any doubt in anyone's mind that he would be an obvious next choice.
Yes, and reiterating something that Andy said earlier, the Curse of Cain still has not presented itself.
100%.
Yeah, which later elves would probably realize, like we're talking thousands of years later, would probably look back and go, that's probably a red sign. It's probably a red flag of some kind. But I don't think they
think it's, I agree completely. And I think it's worth adding just one other point as well. The elves themselves probably weren't that aware of it, because
they probably didn't know yet.
That was very much Inarian's issue, and Inarian denied it. This is not an issue, and the curse was his alone. He was the one that was wearing the crown. He was the one that was dealing with that. His family's quite aside from it. And the fact that it curses the entire line is at this point not really a primary thought. It becomes one, though, because bloody hell does Malekith make some fun choices.
Yeah. So Malekith comes home. He's doing a great job expunging the chaos cults. He's kind of and he's back in Ulthuan, which means that Malekith actually starts to deal with a lot of discomfort regarding the politics of the elves. And I think he begins to see a lot of the issues with it, and that he sees a lot of these elves who are kind of sitting around like they don't know what's going on out in the real world. A lot of them probably think chaos is permanently defeated.
Yeah, I'm going to add an extra little point there too.
Yeah,
this is the point when he's killing elves.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, this is worth mentioning, because everything else has been him going out, and he comes home, and what is it that he does? He comes back to root out chaos amongst his own kind, who should fucking know better as far as he's concerned. And ultimately, at the heart of it, he's killing elves for the first time, probably in his life. He's going back and he is taking to task his own people. And that immediately moves him from being someone who is purely a hero for his species, for his kind, into someone who is now, for some, a deeply divisive figure, because he's at the very peak of elf murder, even if they're bad elves, because not all of them will be. Mistakes will be made, particularly when you're being brutal and you're inquisiting your way through elven society. Things are going to go wrong, but as far as we can tell, he was pretty brutal in his attempts to root them out.
Yes, and while it's not common in it's not it's not as common nowadays. It's worth noting that all of elf society was still one at this point. Ignoring the colonies. So like you have some elves that are a little more on the dark elf
colonies.
Yeah,
I would argue even the colonies at this point are still they're still part of the rule to a degree.
Yeah, where I'm going with it is that you have to remember that the Nagaroth elves and like a lot of the darker aspects that the High Elves try really hard to project later on are still very present in yeah, there's an inquisition. So, hey, you've got this neighbor that's been pissing you off or you need to get rid of them for X reason. Absolutely, there are people planting evidence on one another. The Cult of Pleasure is trying to throw Malekith off the trail. So, like, absolutely innocents are dying.
Yeah, the elves of Ulthuan are not the high elves, and don't think of them as that just now.
Yeah, no.
They're in terms of the overall map of what the elves will become. You could argue they're almost closer to the wood elves than any of the other ones, in that they are at one with both sides of the pantheon, the Mandela of gods, and that means that there is a significant undercurrent of. Darkness isn't the right term, and I don't like it, but certainly an undercurrent of accepting a broader array of potential solutions.
Yeah, and so Malekith, he's full on witch hunter general at this point, and he is he's following all of these really trails. And the thing is, Malekith is amazing at it. Like, he's probably a little more kill happy than he should, trigger happy than he should be, but especially because like he starts kind of lapping up a lot of the political, he's being buoyed up by a lot of the people that love him and all this stuff, but he ends up following the trail and it leads him back to Mom. And Morathi, to her, like, Morathi is a very good schemer. And in a lot of ways, Morathi did not want to be discovered by him. So there is a lot of credit to Malekith that he ends up following it back to Mom. Yeah. But he confronts her, and wildly enough, they fight. They have a huge wizard duel because Morathi basically is like, you would not dare arrest me. And he genuinely doubles down on, I made a commitment. I will take this to the top, and you are the top. Like this ends here. So they have a big fight. And Malekith with the Circlet of Iron defeats his mother. There is kind of a funny note that magically he's not quite able to overwhelm her, but what it does allow him to do is close the gap. And when he gets close to Morathi, he actually overwhelms her physically because she cannot keep up with him in a fight. And so Morathi is taken down, and this leads to probably the most pivotal moment, or one of the most pivotal moments in Malekith's entire life, is he has to decide what to do with his mother. Because Morathi very much throws it in his face of, is he going to kill his own mom? And like Andy said earlier, despite everything that he knows she's done and that she's at the center of this, and the fact that he has been very executioner style, he doesn't kill Mom. Instead, he takes her prisoner. He arrests her and he takes her back to Lothern to be locked up in the prisons near the Phoenix Court. Which Morathi at this point very much starts whispering in her son's ear, and this is the point in Malekith's life where that poison starts to stick.
Yeah, I think it's worth a small point worth adding here as well.
Yeah.
Let's look at Morathi and her motivations. Her ultimate motivations here are to see her son as Phoenix King.
Yep. Get him on the
and you can clearly see what her plan is here if you want to look for it. And her plan is obvious. Utterly destabilize the rule of the current Phoenix King and bring her own son in to fix it. And it 100% works. She is thoroughly successful, regardless of what words may have been bandied about, no matter what she may look like as a potential chaos cult.
She wins.
Not.
She wins.
She has won this day. She's got what she wanted. She's got her son where she wants. And if you're looking for someone who is cold, calculating, and doing whatever needs to be done for what she believes is the best outcomes for the elves as a whole, she's 100% succeeded. And the very cults that she's created have been destroyed by her son. If you want to look at her as someone who isn't a Slanesh worshipper, you have all of the clues there to show she isn't. She's using the weakness of idiots who would be willing to accept that sort of foolishness into their lives to install her son as king.
Yeah, and I saw someone kind of ask a question earlier, wondering what had the elves been doing all of this time? Like, why did Morathi make the pleasure cults. You have to keep in mind, all these thousands of years, Malekith's off been playing hero. Morathi has been plotting. Like
100%.
the moment her son was not declared Phoenix King and Malekith was like, Mom, calm down. Like, yeah, sure, she calmed down, but that's because she started thinking. And those gears were turning, and she was like, how, even if my son doesn't want it, how do I get him on the throne? Because that is his destiny. He is an Aryan son. He is the living embodiment of my husband. He needs to be on the throne, even if he doesn't want it. How do I get him there?
If you want to think of her motivation, imagine this. She's a woman who is utterly in love with her now dead husband. And if you can just imagine yourself being that person who's so utterly, utterly consumed by that, and then that person saying to you, I want my son to be king. Doesn't matter if that happened or not. That's where she's sitting. And all of everything that she is, her passion is dedicated towards this end. And that means anything, any step at all that can bring that about is 100% acceptable. And if that means that a whole bunch of elves corrupt for the benefit of elves as a whole, as in getting my son on the throne, that's fine.
Yeah, and this is the part where Malekith's tale starts becoming a tragedy, and also there's a lot of dramatic irony in that we, the audience, know that if Malekith had just stayed the course, he would have been Phoenix King, and there wouldn't have been any problems. But Morathi isn't patient. She's not willing to wait, and she doesn't care what if Malekith earns, because in her mind, he's already earned it. He's born an Aryan son. He deserves to be king. So she starts really whispering into Malekith's ear, and she starts pointing out Belshazzar's flaws. She starts pointing out, hey, do you see how Belshazzar's taking credit for everything you've done in the colonies? All the fighting you've done, the soldiers you've lost, the friends that have died, your relationship with the dwarfs, your defeat of chaos. Belshazzar's taking credit for all of it. He's sitting here not doing anything. He's loafing around on his throne, allowing these pleasure cults to pop up. All of this is Belshazzar's weakness. Look what he's doing to us because he's so weak, which is not completely wrong. Belshazzar was not the strongest of the Phoenix Kings by a kind of a large margin. He was completely out of his depth.
But then you could also argue that look at the great empire that he built that could be arguably Kratos' as well. I think that it would be easy to take almost any line with him. And in some respects, that's the weakness of his rule. Anyone could claim they were his, but equally, because he was so generic in terms of the overall benefits that he brought to society, anyone could say that he didn't do enough. Because he did just enough.
Uh-oh. I think we lost.
Been lost?
Oh, nope. Okay, I think you're back now.
Well, okay. Well,
yeah. Cool. Okay, there you are. It was a very dramatic pose. It was good. But no, I agree. And like the Sundering books do a beautiful job of painting Belshazzar of he genuinely is a good king, but he did not know how to deal with the pleasure cults. He was not willing to pull the trigger on other elves. Like he was not comfortable with. Morathi did, I think, a very good job of knowing what Belshazzar would and would not be willing to do, and she pushed him to that point. Yeah, that's why Belshazzar called Malekith home, because he literally was like, I can't do this. I'm not a. He was not a general. Belshazzar was not a warrior. He was a peacetime ruler.
And again, Morathi wins. She got what she wanted.
Yeah. So in any event, Morathi is imprisoned. She spends a lot of time with Malekith. Like he starts seeing her literally every day because he lives there, and Malekith kind of in his head, he tells himself, I'm trying to like learn everything from Morathi. I'm going to manipulate my mother so I can learn where the rest of the pleasure cults are. And I'm going to grab this by the roots and pull it out. But in reality, he's being very heavily influenced by what she's saying to him. And a lot of what she's saying to him, she has been concocting these words for thousands of years, and she knows her son. She knows her son very, very well.
Yeah, okay, let's be blunt here. Okay, by this point, Morathi is ancient by anyone's reckoning. Okay, she's a mass manipulator and also a very, very capable individual manipulator. She has a very clear goal, and that is her son. She is, by most accounts, the most beautiful elf or indeed creature that exists in the world. She has managed to bring about effectively everything her son needs to become the next king. She is quite extraordinary as an individual. It's very easy to cast her, particularly at this point, as a horrible manipulator, but she's almost the opposite to him. This is his mum. This is someone who knew his dad properly. This is someone who can speak cogently to those times and what has come about. And arguably, if you're wanting to look between the lines, you can now see her saying the truth. And the truth is, you should be king. This came about because you should be king. And him being confronted with his younger version of himself, who was not yet capable of taking those steps, who instead bowed down before the other Phoenix King, and being told, dude, the problem of all these cults is ultimately sourced in yourself. And the reason that chaos is rising here is because you weren't there to put it down. You need to be the one that's here.
Yeah. And very much putting it to him of that, if you you have the moxie now, you have the guts to do what needs to be done. That's what you've been doing since you came home. So do what needs to be done. And he does. So Malekith, this is when he becomes a very, very big shift, is Malekith finally fully commits to the idea he should be king. And the thing that really shows how fucking brilliant Morathi is that she knows Belshazzar so well. Like, we're not even talking about Malekith this way, just Belshazzar, that she predicts how Belshazzar is talking to Malekith. Like, she knows how Belshazzar acts. She's been around him for a very long time. And because she's still an Arian's wife. Like, she still has a lot of influence in the Phoenix Court. And Morathi predicts what Belshazzar is going to say to Malekith, and she weaponizes that to tell Malekith, I know how he thinks he's going to do XYZ, and he's doing it to take credit or to use you for his own ends. When Belshazzar isn't doing that, he's being genuine. So when Malekith is talking to Belshazzar, Belshazzar says exactly what Morathi told him he would say. But instead of Malekith hearing it for what it is, he's hearing what his mother told him it actually is.
Yeah, 100%. And Morathi's greatest, her greatest weapon, amongst all the rest of the awesomeness that we've discussed, is the fact that she's also a seeress. She's using magic all the time to peer into the future. And this becomes a core part of her character later when she moves up to Gon and peers into the Chaos Waste to see what's coming next and forms the sorceresses. But because of that, her greatest weapon here is the truth. And it allows her to tell the biggest lies because she can just tell truth after truth after truth bomb. And it constantly looks like something that you're like, no, that won't happen. It happens. And she can say, see, I told you, son. See, I told you, son. And it makes her look like a better repository of information, a better repository of the truth than his own actual senses. Because his senses and his expectations go in one direction. And she says, no, listen, I know what's coming. It's this. It comes. And she says, and that happened because of this. And that's where she sows the extra seeds of doubt.
Yeah. So Malekith pulls the trigger. He goes to visit Belshazzar, and they have a very private conversation where it's actually kind of implied Belshazzar is about to reveal his whole, like, you should be king, and here's how I think we should do this. That way, like, I can retire, you can take over as king, and yada yada, because I'm exhausted. I don't want to do this anymore. And Malekith offers a toast early in the conversation, and the chalice is poisoned. So Belshazzar dies. And Malekith summons all of the princes to the Shrine of Assurin, who don't know what's going on. Malekith did not let news of the Phoenix King's death get out yet. So the Phoenix King dies, all the princes gather to the Shrine of Assurin with the understanding that the Phoenix King has summoned them, which was Malekith played his hand a little too hard, because he was so assured of his victory at this point, because he knew he had a lot of support. He had a ton of support. And Malekith finally came to the decision of, I'm going to make this happen. It must happen. And anyone who doesn't agree with it is in the way of progress. They're in the way of the future of the elves, and I'm not going to allow weakness to hold us back anymore. So Malekith summons all of the princes, and they all show up at the Shrine of Assurin, and everyone's like, Malekith walks in with his mother and also a very large guard. And an important thing to note about the Shrine of Assurin is that it's supposed to be a place of true neutrality, because Assurin is a very neutral god. And it's supposed to be a place where pacifism. no one is allowed to have weapons in the Shrine of Assurin. The Shrine Keepers cannot have weapons. Guests cannot have weapons. You are not allowed to bring weapons in. So Malekith shows up, and everyone's like, where the hell's the Phoenix King? Where's Belshazzar? And Malekith drops a huge bomb. I tracked all the pleasure cults, and it turns out Belshazzar was the master cultist. Belshazzar was the ultimate servant of Slaanesh, and when I confronted him, he killed himself. He killed himself rather than face justice. And a lot of the princes, it's pretty much split 50-50. Half the princes go, of course, Belshazzar was weak. He was awful. I always knew Malekith should be king. Obviously, Malekith should be king. And the other half go, that's very convenient, Malekith. That's suspiciously convenient.
Yeah, this is the one that when you're looking at the various motivations of the characters and what brings them to, this is actually one of the hardest ones to clearly justify. This is one of the hardest ones to look at and say, what was Malekith thinking? Why did he choose to do it this way? Why did he pose it this way? And the answer is, in most cases, difficult to pin down, because he was in a position of almost absolute authority, and he chose a ridiculous route, an actual ridiculous route here. He had everything. He had all the cards in his hands, and he chose to chuck half of them away to pursue a route that didn't necessarily make the most sense. And this is the one that you have to go. So is this potentially a fascination? Was he perhaps beguiled by his mother? That's how some people try to justify it. Others justify it that his power, his need for power had grown to such an extent that he cast aside solid logic and instead just tried to push his way through it. There's quite a lot of unsure bits here, and I wouldn't like to be in a position where I said it was this.
Yeah, I think in my own little kind of headcanon, I think I like the theory that he got high on his own fumes of everyone, his mother fawning over him, Belshazzar fawning over him, everyone fawning over him. I think he genuinely believed he could pull off a pretty blatant assassination and nobody would second guess him. Or they would just say, oh, well, you should be king anyway, so who cares? Who cares about Belshazzar?
Yeah, I like to, whenever for example, if I was going to be writing this, and I was going to try and justify this in an elf book, for example, I would take one of two routes. Route number one would be leave it unsure, because that allows for the individual reader to make it up themselves. It's a super cop-out, easy way to resolve it. I have done that on more than one occasion.
Classic open door.
Yeah, totally. Because sometimes you look at different versions of the background, they don't quite marry, so your best bet is to just put some Vaseline over it and not look at it too hard. The other alternative would be to try and actually delve into the politics and put Malekith in a desperate place. Put Malekith in a position where if he didn't move now, someone else would. If he didn't push now, something else would happen. Kalador rising, the armies of Nagarai swooping down, filled with cultists of various types. There's so much pressure coming, all of which is detailed in the background. All you need is a little bit extra push in that to get a mind that's already damaged through the death of his best friend, who has already had to kill elf after elf after elf to get where he's going, to see potential real cultists out there coming down, knocking on his door. His only choice was to act immediately. You would need something to just justify that through to his head. It's not so much he's drunk on power, he's desperate, because it requires desperation to take desperate lengths. And he goes to desperate lengths here. He does something which is actually awful. Truly terrible. The first actual act, if you want to look at Malekith's life, where you go, what are you doing? Why?
I would say this is like Dark Elf, full on Witch King. Number one, the moment when Witch King Malekith becomes a reality. And granted, and it's I can't remember. I want to say in the Sundering Omnibus, I want to say that his mother convinced him Belshazzar was going to do something. Like either he was about to like give Malekith some piece of information where he was like banishing him or exiling him or something. And that's the only thing I can think.
I can't recall. That's why. It's so long since I read it.
I cannot recall off the top of my head because the book does say what's going through his mind, but I can't recall what's going through his mind because it's a hard pill to swallow because it is obvious what Malekith did. Like, it's not very subtle.
Yeah, totally. I'd also note as well, just in general, that when we're writing books about Warhammer, which I have done more times than I care to mention, you tend to find that most of the novels are considered not to be canon. And that is perhaps something that will be alien to many of you out there, but that's because Black Library was removed from the studio and often took stories in different directions to what the studio would have preferred. And when the studio itself returns to material that perhaps Black Library have moved in a different direction, they often ignore it. They take the bits they like and they go, that bit's cool, and then they just rewrite it into something that matches what they require for the stories they're telling. And if someone was brought in to say, justify Malekith, that's what would happen. They would look at the story and they'd say, yeah, I'm sure it says something in there, but that's just a story. Here's our truth. And I think that this is the key moment that requires the justification for, as it says there, Malekith is Anakin Skywalker. What is the point, okay, that makes him go and kill all the fucking younglings? And we're not just talking about killing other elves. What's the point where he then turns around and kills the other freaking princes who don't agree with him?
So
holy shit, here he comes.
Malekith, I will say, to his credit, it's not like he didn't know his plan was kind of stupid. He seemed to be very keenly aware of that, because in the Shrine of Assurin, he goes, Phoenix King's dead. All right, let's pick a new Phoenix King. I vote myself, and everyone, and a lot of the Phoenix princes go. The thing that's interesting is that Malekith actually probably would have won that election, but the princes that didn't agree with him are like, no, we think you killed Belshazzar. We want an investigation. Like, we want a full investigation into Belshazzar. You have to prove he is a cultist, or we're pretty sure you murdered the Phoenix King. And Malekith says, no, you don't get to do that. Vote. And they say, no, we refuse. And if you declare yourself king, our kingdoms will not support you. And Malekith says, all right, fuck you guys then. And he motions, and surprise, his guards brought their weapons into the shrine. You're not allowed to have weapons, and it's a massacre.
Yeah, out come the Nagarathi troops, and out come the stabbing. Oh, yeah. Game of Thrones time.
Yeah, and it's full on Game of Thrones. Nobody escapes. Like, some people think, like, literally not a single prince survives. They all get utterly obliterated. Marathi, like, yay, Malekith is Phoenix King. What could go wrong? And Malekith walks into the Flame of Assurin. Now, I think this is a really core part of Malekith. I think the best part about what happens next, and I think we're going to have to talk about the end times a bit here. Malekith at this point suffers from one massive flaw, which is that he romanticizes his father and he doesn't actually know what happened that day. I do not think Malekith realized what you really have to give to walk through the Flame of Assurin. Because when Belshazzar walked through it, he didn't really. Belshazzar was shielded by a bunch of magic. A bunch of wizards cast a barrier on him so Belshazzar could pass through the flames without being burned. And the elves told themselves, if you could pass through the flame, you're Phoenix King. Hooray. But Anarion died. Like, Anarion suffered agonizing suffering and full on died, but
and would not back down.
Yeah, he just kept crawling.
Would not back down because Asburin had to come. And that's the big one. He had to come because his people would die. So as he was burning out to his very last cinder, he refused to back down. There was no movement. And that's a big, big point.
Okay, so King in the YouTube chat says that
Hi, King.
Malekith had been convinced that Kalidor was going to be ascended above him, so that's why he got desperate. That makes sense.
It was running at the back of my head about Kalidor and the armies coming around to Nagarath. I knew all the elements were there. I just couldn't quite remember exactly how they pulled together.
Yeah. So anyway, so the Flame of Assurin, Malekith walks into it, and in his in a mixture of his arrogance and misunderstanding, he doesn't prep himself in any way, shape, or form. He is not aware of what he's walking into, and he doesn't shield himself in any way. Like, he just goes right in like his dad did. But he doesn't understand what his dad went through. So when Malekith walks into the Flame of Assurin, he gets burned like a motherfucker.
But then so did his dad.
Yeah.
And I think this is, for me, this is effectively almost the start of the Witch King era. And the Witch King era ends with him going through this flame again, as we move towards the end times and whatever you think of that particular material. But what is worth saying that now we move into the judgment in many respects of Malekith and his failures and his flaws in his character, and the next however many thousand years are going to be nothing more than him learning to be the real king that he should have been. And that's one way of looking at this particular story. If you're looking for a proper arc and how he got to where he was and where he got to, ultimately, this is the point where he has to make a choice. And he walks in, he gets fried to almost a cinder and chooses to leave.
Yeah.
Now, you could argue it's because he couldn't cope. You could argue it's because he thought he was going to die. You could argue because the pain was too much. You could argue because he refused Ajurin and had too much pride at this point to accept another god's right to burn him. There's lots of arguments you could take, but ultimately he did not burn up.
Yeah, he throws himself back the way he walked into the flame, so he doesn't pass through it. And of course, the high elves liked a positive of, oh, he was judged, like he was too sinful, and Ashurin was like, no, you're bad, and shot him out of the flame. But I do think it is completely canonical that ultimately Malekith threw himself out of the flame.
Yes.
It wasn't Ashurin that cast him out. Malekith did.
Yep.
Now, why he did, like Andy said, is up to a lot of interpretation. And I don't even know if Malekith himself knows why.
I think he probably does. And I'll say one reason why. Because this burning flame is not just a flame. This is the flame of a god. This is the point where the god touches the material realm. This is arguably, if you want to view it in a slightly different way, almost like a tiny little chaos gate.
Yeah,
it's
thank you, Hammer, by the way.
It's a point where the aether touches the mortal realms. A god touches here, and he touched that god. It wasn't just burning fire. There's something deeper. And that would suggest that Malekith, who is brilliant, intelligent, perhaps on his wits' end in a very dangerous mental position just now because of all the danger he sees, but he's still looking for the best for Ulthuan at this point before he is ravaged. And I think it would probably be, if I was being fair and trying to write this up as fair, much more spiritual and much more divinely based than just simply him. Because if we make it just him, we lessen the Warhammer world as a whole, where the gods themselves are definitely real, depending upon how you think they manifest. And he just walked into and confronted a god and chose to walk away from him, chose to turn him down, chose to back away from that god. Ajurin, the judge, you could argue, judged him, or you could argue Malekith judged himself unworthy. There's 1,000 different arguments you could take, but I think you would definitely, if you were trying to look at it, say that the god himself is involved.
Yeah, and that's also, yeah, that's a very excellent point of Ashurin. There are a lot of things Ashurin could have done in that moment. Ashurin kind of did what he always does, which is that he does nothing and waits kind of for everything to play out. But in any event, Malekith throws himself back out of the flame. Marathi is horrified because she did not think it was going to go down that way.
Can you bring up Balakar, the Dark Master, some comic? Because I actually think that's hilarious and speaks to his character in a nutshell. If I was writing it, there would be a strong element of this, because by this point, his pride is beyond peak. And yeah, I could see him looking at God and saying, why should I kneel to you? Why should I burn to you? That will speak to the Phoenix King, the Witch King he becomes. And what he has to break himself for to become later on the Eternity King. If one is accepting that. But yeah, would that be something Malekith could arrive at? I'd say, hell yes.
Yeah, and one point we're going to get into in a minute, actually, I guess we can just kind of touch on it, is that it is worth noting that Ashurin does, whether he found Malekith lacking or he was disappointed by what Malekith does, he does seem to genuinely punish Malekith. And that the thing that's really interesting about Malekith is that he encounters the flame of Ashurin at least 2 more times in his life before the end times. And both times they are used as weapons. It's used as a weapon against him. And it's very effective, which does smack of Ashurin is genuinely pissed at him, or at least not.
I would say it's more like a parent smacking a naughty child and saying, "Grow up." You could argue it a different way. For example, Azurin is upset with him not because he tried to do what he did or all the rest of it, but because he wouldn't accept his place.
Yeah, and so
you got different interpretations if you fancy.
Yeah, and so like one of those times which we're gonna circle back around in front of, but like the Malekith almost wins the Sundering. Like the Sundering, we're going to talk about a little bit, is a very complex war. We're going to only very lightly touch on it, but in the end, so before he tries to undo the vortex, which was like kind of a ridiculous suicide plan, but before that, Malekith almost legitimately wins the war, and he duels against Kalidor the First, who is Prince Emmerich, but he wasn't there at the Shrine of Assurin when everyone got slaughtered. He was out. He didn't want to be there. He was off doing other things. So he's like literally the only guy. And they're like, you have to be king. You're literally the only person. You got to be king.
He was probably going to be anyway, as I recall. And he was the primary alternative candidate, which is probably why he wasn't there. Yeah, totally.
Hated politics. He tried to avoid it as best he could. But he ends up making his way to the Shrine of Assurin. That's when that whole legacy thing with the White Lions happens, where Malekith knew that Kalidor would potentially be a problem, sent assassins after him, White Lions save him, because Malekith is full like mask off at this point. But when Kalidor the First and Malekith have their big finale duel at the end of the Sundering, Malekith wins. Like Malekith beats the snot out of Kalidor. It's really not that close. Malekith completely overwhelms him between sorcery and just he's flat out in many ways
a better dragon fighter. As well, as I recall. Is that what he's on Sulek? Is that what he's on Sulek?
Yes, that is Sulek. Because Sulek died at Finival Plain much later. But so Malekith oh man, I forgot to bring up Malekith's first dragon dies during the wars in the colonies, doesn't it? His very first dragon, not his first black dragon, but his first regular dragon, I think, dies. Anyway, probably not too far before Snorri dies. Man, he had a rough time right at the end there.
He did. A lot of tragedy. And I think that speaks to a lot of the decisions that are to come.
Yeah. So anyway,
he's quite a broken individual, much like his father before him.
Yeah. So exactly. So Malekith beats Kalidor, but Assurin, in a sense, kind of steps in, where it's the Phoenix Guard that actually saved the day. The Phoenix Guard show up and they start fighting Malekith around Kalidor, and they stab him with their halberds. And when normally that wouldn't have been necessarily a huge deal, but when they strike Malekith, their halberds reignite the flame of Assurin. Because the thing about Malekith, the really important thing about Malekith that we're going to talk about now that informs a lot of his character, Malekith is in perpetual agony. He is like, a lot of people are like, wow, he's in like a full suit of armor or whatever, but like, he is Darth Vader. And that Malekith, just like Darth Vader, is in horrible agony 24/7. I don't even think Malekith sleeps. Like he's literally just suffering.
And this isn't going to become something that he actually accepts and becomes a part of him for thousands of years. It's not until the battle for Finival Plain, as I recall, and he casts himself into the realms of chaos, that he comes to terms with what he is and the pain, and finds almost a zen quiet because of the horror he inflicts himself, playing the escape card for those of you who played the old Warhammer games. I play escape. Screw you, Techless. But this is going to, I said, this massively shapes his character, because he's no longer not just the beautiful prince who rode from realm to realm to realm looking extraordinary.
Yeah, his father's image.
The mental anguish as well as the physical anguish he's under constantly. And upon one reading, purely by his own hand, because he refuses to accept the rule of Azurin. Because, as has been mentioned, he effectively is Azurin if you take the Eternity King and all the rest of it as any way near the actual story of Malekith. He is going to become effectively almost a representation of that god, but he refused it. That's the only thing that makes sense. So every time the fire comes, it's not just the pain of it, it's almost the pain of him refusing that god. No wonder he's burning up.
Yeah, and it's very much worth pointing out that like Andy said, like the fire, it's not a fire. It's literally the essence of a god that is broken into the mortal realms and is kind of stationary. And so although it does burn him like flame, it's not like regular burning as we understand it. It's more like his soul is literally set afire by something that never goes out. Like there is a spark of Assurin permanently in him that he cannot get rid of. He never gets rid of it for the rest of his life. And that spark is always burning him, always, which if you think about it is awful. Like Malekith spends 7,000 years, or he's not the entire time, but like a good 5,000 years.
6,000 years there.
Yeah, just
I mean, is that all?
kind of feeling like he's perpetually on fire and his nerves don't get to burn away because it's not a physical pain. Well, it is a physical pain, but it's not. You know what I mean? But anyway, so like the Phoenix Guard that reignites that flame, and Malekith loses his shit because it is so awful. Like the pain is so bad. He just runs. He runs away. He throws himself out. In like he grabs his dragon. He just fucking abandons the field because he can't take it. And that actually costs him that war. Because he loses the battle after that. You know, it's funny you say that, Toka Gaming, because there is one of my favorite scenes, just because it's a little goofy, is the way Tyrion and Teclis defeat Nakari as children. Is they literally cause him to accidentally pass one of his arms through the flame of Shurin, and he turns into Slanesh barbecue. Like he gets burnt up bad.
Yeah, that was a mistake, Nakari. That was a mistake.
And then he falls off a cliff because Nakari is literally a Saturday morning cartoon villain. But
pretty much is.
Like he's about as successful as one. But in any event, so as we said, Malekith, he gets horribly burned. His mother uses her magic to kind of keep him alive despite the pain he's in, and he's brought back.
In many respects, and for those looking for allusions to what came before, doing exactly what she did for Anarion, soothing the pains because of the curse under which he's done. And now you could argue it's the curse of Azurin that's burning through Malekith's veins, and she's probably using exactly the same magics, the same potions, the same lotions to protect her son that she'd used previously to protect her husband.
Yeah, because what protected Anarion from God's wrath also protects Malekith from God's wrath. Yeah,
quite.
So Malekith is taken back to Anlek, where he is put in the armor. And it is so, a lot of people probably don't understand how insane the armor is, because the armor is created by Sotek, and Sotek is the most ridiculous fucking smith in existence outside of like the absolute pinnacle of the other races. Sotek is a priest of Vol who is the biggest, baddest one there is, and he wields the hammer of Vol. And he steals it. He murders all the other priests of Vol at Vol's anvil in Kalador, and he steals the hammer and he runs away to Anlek because he is faithful to Morathi and Malekith. And under with Morathi helping him, he crafts the most powerful suit of armor, I think, in the world.
Yeah, if you want to view Sotek and try to figure out exactly where he fits, not just in the cosmology, but where does he sit in the Warhammer tiers, consider him like the equivalent of Orion and Ariel. He's almost a physical manifestation of a god on a planet. He's a little bit like Anarion before him. He's almost Vol. He's carrying Vol's fucking hammer, and he is sitting there making armor that only the gods themselves can make to keep what is effectively a god to be, if you go for the whole end times, in action.
Yeah, and like a lot of people know that in the later lore, they really go heavy on like all of the elven gods in order to get around Assurin's decree that they can't be involved in the world. They take on mortal incarnates. And Daith is kind of revealed to be the Vol incarnate, but I would actually say that despite that, like Daith literally being the god Vol in mortal form, I would say Sotek is still a more skilled smith because he has that fucking hammer. Because that hammer is so bonkers. And he hangs on to it until he dies in the end times. But so he forges the suit for Malekith. The circlet of iron becomes a part of Malekith. And Malekith is reborn as the Witch King. He will never again leave that suit of armor, ever. He cannot eat. He cannot drink. He cannot feel the pleasures of the flesh at all. He can literally breathe and talk. That's it. Because the armor is melded to his flesh. It's awful. And it keeps him alive, but a lot of what Malekith becomes, he literally experiences no more pleasure.
Yeah, he's reached the end of a standard life. He is now a creature. He is something different.
Yep. And that ties very much into, now we kind of look at Malekith the Witch King. When Malekith he is so consumed by agony and hurt emotionally, physically, spiritually. Like, as far as he's concerned, his gods have betrayed him, his people have betrayed him. Like everything that he has ever stood for and built up has betrayed him, and he's fucking furious. And he unleashes the Sundering, which is one of the most bitter, awful wars in Warhammer Fantasy history. It's a full civil war. It's awful. Father fights son, mother fights daughter, a whole thing. And the elves are split very cleanly, as far as like supporters of Malekith versus those against him.
This is also worth saying. This is the first point where we clearly need to say that the what is to become Dark Elf contingent are now becoming the High Elf contingent. The Azure, they are no longer representing the full Mandela of the gods. They are representing a part of it, and a lot of the breakup of Elven society broke up according to their individual cultures and beliefs as much as they did for the individual politics. And there's a reason that the Mandela massively split, and the High Elves lean so heavily one way and the Dark Elves lean so heavily another. And that's the process of this war. And it's a part of this war that's very rarely delved into in any of the material, because most of the writing for this was created before those gods existed. So they never really delved into that. But if you're just looking at it from an above perspective, this is where the High Elves are created and the Dark Elves are created. And ultimately, isn't where the Wood Elves are created per se, because they're already going. They are the remnant of what was already the elves before that. And Malekith effectively ends up leading a court of half of the elven psyche, so to speak. Certainly at half the elven pantheon, with smatterings and bits that they accepted from the other side.
Yeah, because a big thing is that the colonies are very heavily insulated from what's going on in Ulthuan. Like a lot of what's happening in Ulthuan like trickles back to the colonies, but they're left out of it a lot of the way, and they maintain the culture that they'd already had.
Yep, absolutely.
Whereas what Andy's saying, like the thing about the High Elves is that a lot of people look at them and go, oh, they're like the good guys, and it's like in a very, very specific way of looking at it, you could argue that. But what it really is that they completely reject a genuinely healthy balance. They look at the healthy balance and they say to themselves, oh, well, Malekith was a healthy balance, and look what he turned into. So we need to take everything about us that could potentially be bad and suppress it.
And I don't think bad is necessarily the right word, because it's very easy to turn this into a fight between good and evil. It's a fight between one way of life and another way of life. And Malekith and everything that he represented came to be one way of life that they were rejecting. Whilst on the High Elf side, they were very much focusing on a different way of life, with different gods being important. And for the colonies who accepted the overall picture, this is when the real fractures begin to deepen, because they are elves. They don't see the distinction between the High Elf and the Dark Elf as it became to be known, the Druki and the Azure. We follow Azure, and we follow, well, depending on which god you want to follow on. It could be Cain, it could be Aerith Kyle, it could be almost anyone, depending upon which particular write-up you read from which particular writer, but definitely the Dark Elf side. Yes, they do indeed. The Azure reject the Cyrathan. And that's where the divisions between the colonies really come, and the Wood Elves become Wood Elves, and the other colonies something perhaps a little bit different as well, those that don't return.
Yeah, and and we'll touch on the Wood Elves and colonies in a hot second, but Sundering happens. We're just gonna skip it
because big.
Yeah, it's big. A lot of crazy shit happens, but the important thing about Malekith is, I think this is what really drives Malekith to the extremes, as far as Malekith at this point lets go of the pretense of I need to function within a certain set of morals in order to accomplish my goals, and he becomes I will win at any cost.
Yeah, he focuses in on just the darker aspect, if you want to go by the dark elf analogy. The that set of gods, the underworld gods, those that chose to fight the chaos gods all the way back in the very first Elven War, rather than withdraw, as Azurin commanded. Azurin commanded all gods withdraw. But some of them refused to do so and continued to fight on. And there became a split of the gods between the underworld gods, those that stayed material, those that didn't. And it's fascinating to see it repeat, because the old god story repeating again with the new elf story, which is big. I mean, it's not worth going through the whole war, because you could literally do a stream for 5 hours on just all the shit that happens here. But the big callback is all of this gives you a Malekith who is fundamentally focusing on a different aspect of elven society now. Instead of representing it all, he represents only certain parts, and it's fucking ruthless. Because he has almost certainly denied Azurin and everything that Azurin represents. Denied what his father accepted, perhaps denying his father even in turn. Because he has rejected the god that burnt him. Utterly rejected it, and gone down a different path. And all of the horror that led up to that decision has now made manifest a character that completely shapes an entire race of elves.
Yeah. So we see Malekith he does try to conquer Ulthuan through warfare, and it's bitter and awful because it's very personal. He feels that, and it gets ugly. Like, this is when Malekith assassinates any of the Naggareth families that are not on his side. This leads to the creation of Elithanar the Shadow King, because he murders Elithanar's entire family. But a lot of people die. It's awful. And it's like literally it's not even like each kingdom picks a side. No, it is like a split everywhere. Like, there is no kingdom that is purely loyal to one side or the other. You could argue that, like, there's a little more of Naggareth is loyal to Malekith, and a little more of Etain was loyal to the Prince Emmerich. I would say Kalador leaned a little heavier on Emmerich. He's from there. But even then, lots of, like, not traitors, but lots of people picking sides.
They're all picking sides. One way to imagine this is try not to think of it as good guys and bad guys, because that's the easy way to do it. Particularly, imagine you're a wood elf looking in from the outside. Okay, so not even a wood elf. It's just an elf in one of the colonies, and you see the civil war that's going on over there. You don't think over there and go, look, there's the bad guys and there's the good guys. You see both sides encapsulating certain aspects of elven society, one bitterly, ruthlessly attacking the other. And it's horrendous. Neither side are good, neither side are bad, but you can say that one side is going to eventually hold Ulthuan.
Yeah. And sorry, Ragged White. I was like, oh, that's a great comment. It's like, it's so big, it can't see us. But I would definitely no, the colonies for the most part stayed out of it. Because they really didn't understand what was going on
until they get summoned back.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, so but that's later.
Malekith, like we said, he loses the war barely. But Malekith, and it's worth noting that Malekith is completely, genuinely insane for this moment. He's in a lot of pain. He's in a lot of agony. The Phoenix Guard have freshly reburned him. He's lost a very important battle. And he is reeling. And in that moment, Marathi, as well as some of the sorcerers, come to him with a really, frankly, stupid plan, which is they say,
certainly bold.
Yeah, we should unbind the vortex. And Malekith, I think, because of how much hurt he's in, very much has the idea of, if I can't rule Ulthuan, no one gets to rule Ulthuan.
Yeah. And that's dropped quite a few times by various writers who've gone for that as the justification. But if you look at the overall picture of what's happening at the time and what the elves themselves are, you can easily add extra layers, because these are proper sorcerers who aren't insane. There's a reason they're pitching this to him. And they're not pitching it to him because they want to destroy Ulthuan. They're pitching it to him because they want to win, because they think they can do it. Malekith himself is unarguably out of it. Following him must be a very difficult process, because I can't imagine he's in the most, let's say, solid state. But the sorcerers are. So what are they pitching? They're clearly pitching an idea. And I think the only obvious answer is they're saying, we can get our magic back. We can wake up the old dragons. we can bring everything that we had back then to fruition. And you've got to remember, a lot of the generals here fought in the wars against chaos. These are not weird elves who've just arrived in the last 100 years. Some of these are thousands of years old already.
Yeah,
some of these will even remember the time before. These are proper ancient elves, and they're going, we want what we had back. Your father was right. Your father was right, and Kalidor was wrong.
Yeah, look what's happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Look what's happened. This has happened. And you can see there's a very clear argument here for this side. And it looks insane from the outside, but from the inside, when you think of their thought processes, they're just going, we can reclaim Ulthuan the way it should be.
Yeah, and I think there's a very core part of Morathi's involvement of... If there's one thing that I have to give credit for Morathi for, is that she has always been very okay with end time scenarios, because she deeply and genuinely believes, whether misguided or not, that she can float above it. That her power and mastery over magic is so strong that she can bind enough demons or whatever she'll have to do that they will survive. That they will bind chaos to their will and make it work. So to her, oh, the vortex is unbound, demons will flood the plane. Great, more soldiers.
Agreed completely. From Morathi's perspective, this is not a bad thing. This is something that will empower them, not weaken them. It is a gift, as Boromir loves to say.
And once again, the Malekith and the Dark Elves win. At least they should have. In that they throw this uber spell at the vortex, and the High Elves fail to stop it. Like, there's a defector because one of the sorcerers goes, "What are we doing? What the fuck?" Yeah, and he literally like calls up Safari on the microphone. Oh, I can't remember his name. He's a great character, though.
Yeah, he is. He's great.
He dies pretty horribly. Yeah, he gets assassinated, but he calls over the what are now become the High Elves. He's like, "You need to stop us." But Malekith, Morathi, and them, they're too strong. Like, the High Elves literally do not have the magical power to stop him. And Malekith throws this uber spell at the vortex, and unfortunately for him, it ends up being a Deus Ex Machina scenario where it disrupts
Kalidor Ex Machina.
Yeah, yes, it disrupts the vortex. It does its job. But what they didn't realize, and I think it's because there's no way they could have known, is that Kalidor is still alive and he's still in the vortex. So by undoing it, they literally just let Kalidor out. And Kalidor looks around and is like, nah, and just backhands the spell right home.
Because Kalidor is still suffused with all of the energies that came from that vortex pulling down. Kalidor's been locked in time pretty much since the ritual began, chanting forever, doing the same things again and again and again in a constant cycle. It breaks around him. He looks out and he has all of the power he had before. It's going to take something pretty freaking special for him not to just go, fuck you. And indeed, he was like, fuck you, because it's his plan, and he still thinks it's right.
Yeah, and that's even before considering that Kalidor is like one of the best mages that ever maged.
But I think by this point, Malekith is probably almost his peer. But the problem is just purely the difference of their individual circumstances.
Yeah, one guy has a storm of magic.
All of the world's magic at his hands, and the other's on the outside with a particularly impressive circlet of iron and a lot of skill, but nevertheless, him and the cabal of sorceresses around them are not quite the match for what is effectively almost god power sitting in the middle of there.
Thank you, Grim. Yeah, Arathian.
Thank you very much. Couldn't remember that name. That was really bugging me.
Yeah, so spell gets rebound, and this is when the sundering of the land happens. Ulthuan is a lot of people, because we don't have any maps of it, sadly, a lot of people do not realize how much of Ulthuan is lost.
Yeah, totally.
Like a significant amount of the landmass is completely obliterated by tsunamis, earthquakes, and just sheer force. Like the spell rebounding, a lot of people are like, oh, it's the tsunamis. It's like, yeah, the tsunamis happened after, but there were parts of Ulthuan that literally just got turned to dust. Like a fist just punched it.
Yeah, this is a proper cataclysm.
Yeah, so, but Malekith sorcerers, credit to them, go, Plan B! Let's get the fuck out of here. And they float their fortresses. Yep. They literally crack off their fortresses. And they float up above the tsunamis that come in. Everyone not in the fortress dies horribly. Millions of elves die. It's awful.
This is arguably the end of the Elven Empire.
Yes.
This is the point where, even though it does continue on for a long time yet, this is the point when it stops being what it was. Yeah,
and the wealth of Ulthuan actually flips, because thanks to a lot of the colonies and stuff, the Outer Kingdoms used to be the wealthiest.
Yeah.
Not the Inner Kingdoms, but the Outer Kingdoms get destroyed.
Wrecked. Utterly wrecked.
Yeah. Even to today, like, they're practically ghost towns. Like Tiranoc, a lot of Tiranoc is still underwater. Nagaryth is completely gone.
It's a blasted hellhole.
Yeah, there's a reason when, like, you look at the High Elves, there is no army of Nagaryth among the High Elves. There's only the Shadow Warriors, because there's no settlements, really. Like, Nagaryth is gone. It is just it's called the Shadowlands now, because there's nothing there. So Nagaryth, so Malekith and all those guys peace out and they leave, because all they have left are their fortresses. Their populations are severely reduced. They are heavily wounded. And I'm sure for them, they're reeling from the knowledge that Kalador is there. And like, oh shit, what if he can still affect us? And they get the fuck out of Dodge. So they go to Nagaroth, which no one wanted to go to. But this is when Malekith takes the next big step, where Malekith has now been betrayed by everything, and he establishes Nagaroth, which luckily their empire starts off pretty strongly, because they literally just float the Black Arcs and just attach them to the land and are like, good, we have a city.
There's Nagaroth.
It's pre-built.
Yeah, it's an awesome little tale of absolute failure, but all of his, you could say, either rebels, or you could argue that they are the ones that should be in control, because they believe Ulthuan is theirs. They believe that anyone that's on Ulthuan that's denying the Phoenix King as they perceive it is in the wrong. And they float up above all the hell they unleash, and they go settle over in Nagaroth, and away they go. Big castles already in place, and the first Black Arcs ready to go.
Yeah, and this takes us into the next big part of Malekith's story, which is that he starts to build up Dark Elf culture. And Malekith, I think this is him projecting very heavily onto his own people, becomes obsessed with rooting out weakness. Like, he becomes...
I'll take a different line on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
And say that I think it's less necessarily of Malekith's individual personality and more the personified gods. It's the very nature of the gods that they themselves are coming to manifest and focus on. Because all of those gods got such a different view on how, let's say, society should be built. And when that's compounded upon with the reality of their new environment, where they are in a frozen hellscape, with the chaos nightmare to the north, and the need to create and build to ensure that what they might at that point think will be the elves coming to try and wipe them out. So they've got to do something to allow themselves to build. And there's only one way that they can do that as far as they're concerned. And very quickly, their society doesn't just change. Their society, by necessity, becomes something very different, based on a completely different set of morals, but not different to elves, more refined. They're only accepting certain parts of elven society because they're utterly turning their back on Azurin and everything that particular part of the Kadai of the gods, that court represented. And by doing that, that effectively creates what had been called back in the war, the Druki, the Dark Elves, as the Dark Elves themselves manifest. I think not necessarily by the command of Malekith, but by all of their very natures now. This is who they are now. This is the path that they have chosen to walk down. This is the type of elves they have chosen to be. And they are not going to turn their back in pride. They have wiped out their own families. They have destroyed their homelands. They have to accept either they're wrong or they're right. And if they're right, then the path they've chosen has to be plowed down without ever looking back. And you can see how they became what they became.
Yeah, and I think it's worth kind of elaborating for people listening who don't really know them. So the underworld gods, the Scytherai, I think is that how you pronounce it?
I vacillate.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. Gav created them, and I've never asked him how he pronounced it.
I like to say Scytherai because I'm weird. Anyway, so for those unaware, they're a really interesting set of gods. Of course, the big bad one is Cain. You have Cain, the bloody-handed, Lord of Murder.
Aerith Kael's arguably the big bad one.
Is she
Queen?
Yeah, she almost kind of seems to like she almost seems like almost. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Morai Heg. Morai Heg's the one
Morai
that's like
Heg's quite
neutral-ish.
different. Yeah, she is.
Sorry. So
Erith oh my goodness.
Yes, yeah. Arithkiel, she is weird, and also super fucking dangerous. But she rules an actual underworld and she steals souls. She's terrifying. Also, she got really upset at Ashurin and has not let it go for ever since.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Azurin's desire to pull back from the mortal realms was utterly unacceptable for her. But the order came, and that, in many respects, broke the pantheon in the same way that the High Elves and the Dark Elves later broke apart, following almost the same line as their gods thousands of years before.
Yeah, and to put into perspective how scary the Pale Queen is, which is her epithet, she is literally stealing away souls as much as she can to build a legion of the elven dead to take over heaven, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Don't think of necromancy as the province of humanity. It absolutely isn't. It came from the elves first. They've been studying it for not just centuries, but millennia. The darker arts of Dar in particular. And the Malekith and Marathi at this point are studying it deeply as well. And they will effectively extend their lives permanently because of their understanding of the dark arts of magic. And ultimately that means they're using the chaos to build up themselves. And they know that.
Yeah, so, and I'm going to very quickly summarizing the gods. Authority, Lady of Pleasure, very big on carnal desires and really embracing all the pleasurable aspects of life, like really delving into that.
Totally.
We don't have time for it now. Super interesting stuff about Authority versus Slanesh, how they intersect and how they're different, because they're
I could talk about that one all day.
But anyway, moving on. We've got her sister Hakardi, the Mistress of Magic. Very, very the two of them are sisters. They both pine for Cain, and there's actually kind of some hilarious exploits of how they screw with each other. You then have Cain the Bloody-Handed, we already talked about. Arithkiel, we already talked about. And then you have the so-called gods of destruction. You got Estrueth, the Lord of Hunger, Hukon the Sunderer, which they're not as well explored as I would like, those two in particular. Astarioth, I think, the Lord of Fire.
Astarioth, yeah.
Yeah, which he's a destructive son of a bitch. He's probably one of the more destructive. Mathlan, Lord of Oceans and Earthquakes, I think also fall under his.
And Mathlan's quite interesting because it's one of the gods that actually bridge over quite a lot, because Mathlan's very important over with the Azure as well. Because,
and then
all the elves piling across the ocean, the Path of Mariner.
Rama, Aneth Rama, the Savage Huntress. Really interesting god. A lot of really good lore on her. And then who's their dad? I can't remember their dad's name. The Lord of Destruction.
I always forget his name. I've got it written down.
No, that's Lord of Blades.
No, that's Lord.
Yeah, Elenel's the Lord of Blades.
Honestly, I don't have it here in front of me.
Yeah,
but
he's not that important. He's literally just what's it called? He's just Kronos, and he basically like he's not that important anymore.
Yeah, in many respects, yes.
But anyway, so like it's a pretty nasty little pantheon.
It really is, and it's one that puts front and center.
Oh no, it is Elenel. Eldrazor is the Lord of Blades. I think
Eldrazor, yeah, Eldrazer.
Yeah, Eldrazer.
Yeah. Oh, whenever I read that,
I'll never forget it again. Now, thank you.
No, yeah, totally. That's it's an Eldrazer. But these gods are really focused on destruction, upon immediate resolution, not long term. Let's do the big game. It's all about now. And then you look at someone like Arithkiel, forced into doing things that she didn't want to, building up an enormous army because she has to, not because she wants to. And it very much speaks to the Dark Elf psyche. They're doing it because they have to, because they're right, because what they're doing has to be done. And that allows them to override all of the other aspects of their character, because in the end, they are elves who might say, wait a minute, this is unacceptable. What I'm doing is this is horrible. The things I'm doing are actually terrible, but they can override that by the expediency, the need, the desire. And elves being elves, they can focus themselves so completely on an individual way of thinking, much like the Elder over in 40k. By focusing so much on that, the rest of it just fades into existence. They are almost pinnacles of what it is to be these individual types of elves. And yeah, It's good times. Yeah, quite a lot of Gillette.
Yeah.
It really wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And the last, of course, I forgot is Drakira, the Queen of Vengeance. But it's
can't forget her. She's awesome.
Yeah.
Like
all of the Dark Elves. I think the thing that Andy keeps saying that is really important is that they're not. It can seem it, especially if you come at it from not having like explored their history up to this point, because it's a reflection. In many ways, it's kind of a reflection of Malekith, where if you come at them as they are now, you go, "Wow, these guys are like comically evil." Like it's almost ridiculous. Like there's torture and slavery and all this other horrible stuff, but they are really built much more around a concept of survival, no matter the cost.
And I think there's a reason they look comically evil. It's because they kind of are. And when they were first created, they really were. They were an adaptation of other species that had been built by other writers and then brought into King's Workshop lore. And then they looked at it and went, you know what? This is how our version of the Dark Elves were created. And slowly but surely over time, the lore got deepened and deepened. And some of the writers didn't just make them comically evil. They were literally twirling their mustaches as they were writing away. Some of the things that they do make no sense at all if you look at them. But with a little bit of extra space and time and other writers who've come in later, you can see it all and go, wait a minute, this is just a hugely tragic, absolutely horrible tale of a broken set of people through the decision of one individual. Malerion has utterly broken. And you could argue that the next most important character in all of Elvenkind is Malekith, because ultimately he is the one that carries all of Anarion's legacy and flubs it until the very end.
Yeah. And so at this point, I think is when Malekith enters what I could think would be called his depression phase. Though it's a very brutal depression phase.
It really is.
Of that he has failed completely and utterly. Everything that he ever wanted has been thrown back in his face, and it has gotten very, very it's gotten very ugly. And the thing about Malekith is at this point he's hurting and he starts to kind of lash out in some really terrifying ways. Like literally one of the first acts that we see Malekith really do when he finally kind of gets enough out of his own stupor to take action is that the Northmen come down. The Hung primarily. So all these Hung are like, hey, who the hell are these guys that just moved into our turf? And they're like, oh, let's go raid and kill these guys. So they come down and they're actually being a problem. Like the Dark Elves are having a hard time pushing them back because there's just so many of them. Then Malekith comes outside and Malekith is not in a good mood. And he obliterates them. And there's a note about not only does Malekith whoop their ass, but he takes a bunch of them prisoner, ties them to his chariot, and he leaves a line of blood from the gates of Naggarond all the way up to where the Hung borders are way beyond where the watchtowers will eventually be out. Like there is a genuine blood trail that Malekith creates out of prisoners from Naggarond to there, because Naggarond does not give a shit about humans.
No, they have nothing but contempt for them.
Like they are gnats. They are annoying. They're short-lived. They're barbaric. He does not care for them.
In fact, I'll go further. I think insects is a marvelous analogy. I had ants in my house at one point, and they just came marching in my house. They're right pain in the arse. Did I just pour boiling water over those fuckers to get rid of them? Yes, I did. They mattered nothing to me. Little fuckers were all. My baby was only at this point 2 months old, and a year old at that point. These ants marching into her cot. Yeah, no, that's getting stopped. They're really annoying. They are destroying things, and they view humans in a similar fashion. Yeah, it's destroying things on the edge of their territory, but the second that they munch away at something they don't like, boil them out, burn them out, blood them out. They literally mean nothing until they realize, wait a minute, they're a natural resource.
Yeah. Yeah, they can build. They can they can, even though Naggaroth soil is awful, they can make the most of it. And, you know, Dark Elves, the thing about dark magic, especially, which Malekith goes heavy into at this age. So, like, he fully embraces dark magic. He starts learning how to bind demons. He starts doing everything he does, like Andy said, to extend his own life so that he can have his revenge, because right now that's all that matters to him. And B, to further his own power and his own knowledge. And Malekith, the thing about dark magic is it comes at a price. You do not get dark magic for free. It is not how it works. It is a very corruptive source. But what the Dark Elves figured out and is super fucking sinister is that you don't have to pay the price. If you're very good with magic and very clever, you can make somebody else pay the price. Yeah. So the Dark Elves are flat out, like, a lot of people wonder why the Dark Elves are so ridiculous as far as like sacrifices and like these bloody rituals and stuff. It's because that's how you thwart the cost of dark magic.
Yeah, there's a variety of different ways you can view that. For those of you who you're Warhammer lore, or perhaps play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you get the concept there of a spell ingredient. And that spell ingredient is something that you can channel your magic through so that the magic doesn't really affect you. So if the magic goes out of control, the ingredient takes the worst of it and burns up. And you can view Dark Elves basically doing the same thing with people. They're using soul stuff and soul energy to effectively distance themselves from the very worst that dark magic and the gods and whatever else you want to look at bring to the table. But that doesn't mean that Naggaroth itself doesn't then change because of the amount of Dar. It's a horrendous corruptive force, and it's sinking into everything. A land that was already, let's say, on the brink of being a frozen hellhole becomes, if anything, even worse. It becomes something that demons themselves can probably survive in without need for anyone to summon the fuckers. They can just come down. Yeah, indeed. And that's something that the Dark Elves themselves will use, because as far as they're concerned, they are also a natural resource. We as humans, particularly given just how strongly we're influenced by the rhetoric and material that comes out for the Empire, where chaos is wrong, destroying the world, it's evil and everything else. For the Dark Elves by this point, chaos is not any of those things. Chaos is a powerful force that they can use, and they do. Yeah, they have to watch for it because it's dangerous. But it's not only dangerous, it's also super powerful for predicting what's coming in the future. It's super powerful. In fact, just cut it down to it's super powerful, and Dark Elves are super powerful in turn because of it.
Yeah. And to answer like some questions I see in chat of like, well, that doesn't, if that kind of makes sense, but this doesn't explain some of their darker actions. You have to keep in mind that dark magic is having an impact on them. It's twisting them even further. It's driving them to further depths.
And I think I'd also say as well that it's very easy to place a human morality on people that are not human. They don't see the things that you see as wrong. They just don't. They don't see it as wrong. They don't see it as depravity. They see it as a part of their existence. They would see completely different things as depravity. And if you're looking for a way to try and build that up, I actually recommend looking at a roleplay game of all things. Vampire the Masquerade lets you be a bad guy, a vampire. And in there, it's got rules for how you can be a bad guy, but also a very strict, real morals that guide your soul and make you think you're the good guy. Even if you are doing horrendous, sadistic, terrible things, you think you're the good guy. And the same thing here. The Dark Elves are not evil in that they don't think they're evil. They still think they're the good guys in the right, doing the right things. And that's something you need to try and get your head around. It's very easy to go comedic bad guys and just leave it at that. But to do so is it's almost a disservice to what is a really fascinating society that's utterly horrific to our perspectives and awful, but nevertheless fascinating.
Yeah. So at this point, Malekith's life, just skipping ahead, especially because we're we're coming up on time here in a little bit, but
we got to end eventually.
Yeah. So Malekith pulls off what I personally consider his magnum opus, which is the War of the Beard. Malekith knows the dwarves better than anyone. He's dwarf friend. He was best friends with High King Snorri Whitebeard. He literally built that alliance, so he knows the dwarves. He knows what the dwarves value, and horribly, he in this depression, this twisted darkness, the same way he views kind of chaos and humans, he starts to look at dwarfs the same way, where he looks at them as a resource and pawns, and realizes that he can use the dwarfs to hurt the high elves like the high elves hurt him.
Yep.
And he does. He pulls off a literal master plan of assassinations and ambushes and makes it look like the high elves did it. And he knows very smugly in his citadel that both the elves and the dwarves are too stubborn and too arrogant, respectively, to find a peaceful resolution. And that's exactly what happens. It goes off like a masterstroke, especially it didn't help that the High Elves, and once again, some irony, after Kalidor, they were so scared after what happened with Malekith, and they were very vulnerable that they're like, okay, well, Kalidor was a really cool king, so let's make his son king, even though they should have known better.
Yeah, they should have, shouldn't they?
So we get Kalidor II, the worst Phoenix King.
He is truly awful. Go read him up if you fancy. And I think that this, I couldn't agree more. This entire period shows that for all Malekith has completely changed, he's still that same brilliant strategist. He's still an extraordinarily capable leader. But what he has, in terms of his morals, is a completely different framework. The Malekith that he was when he was best pals with Snorri would never have done this. It would never have even occurred to him. But he has lost access to that entire part of the Mandala. He has lost Ajurin in his life. He no longer has the capability to judge what is right and what is wrong in the same way. The judgment of Ajurin has gone. He has denied it. He is only accepting those darker roots. And that has left us with a horrendous war that devastates two peoples completely and is to the Dark Elves' benefit, really. It changes the fabric of the old world entirely. The High Elves end up withdrawing from their colony.
Funny enough, to humanity's benefit, too.
In many respects, this is what allows humanity to rise in the old world, because the elves that had completely dominated all of the lowlands almost entirely withdraw, leaving a couple of spots here or there of individuals who refuse to go. And this massively changes the old world. It massively changes the dwarves. It massively changes Ulthuan. Yet still, when good old Malekith does his attempts to try and take the place, he doesn't quite manage it.
Yeah, well, and that it's kind of the sad thing of that Malekith does all of this just to give himself an opportunity to try and take Ulthuan back.
Yeah,
like
all of it.
It wasn't even really, he didn't care how the War of the Beard went. It was just a distraction. Like,
it's exactly what it was.
Yeah, he did not give a damn. Like, if anything, it probably worked a lot better than he had hoped, because as good as his plan was, it was Kalidor II's fault that it went way overboard and turned as bitter as it did.
I mean, it should never have turned out the way that it did.
Yeah, and this, of course, then leads to the Wood Elf incident, where Ulthuan realizes they're being invaded by Malekith after they've poured a ton of resources into a war against the dwarves, and I think it's Caradriel calls everybody home. Kalidor II dies, and he says, "We're being invaded. We don't have enough people. Come home. We need everybody to come home." And the colonies say, that is not our problem. The Dark Elves are not our thing. Like, we're elves.
It's your war.
Yeah, this whole split thing, this is your problem. Why should we have to abandon our homes? Of course, unfortunately for them, it doesn't work out that easily, because the dwarfs are like not done. And the dwarfs destroy many of the colonies, which leads to Athelloren in many ways. Though Athelloren itself calls many of the elves to it, because it is suffering under the dwarfs, and calls them home. But we don't have time for that. That's
a whole extra stream.
Yeah. So
because it's a big war.
Like you said, Malekith invades. Big skip, but Malekith invades 3 more times. He invades Ulthuan 3 more times, and he loses. But it's important to note that he doesn't get kicked out.
It's like 1,000 years long. One of his invasions. It's not a short set of wars. This.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Malekith actually rebuilds the fortress of Anlek multiple times, because he wants his father's seat so bad. Because that's where he thinks he can at least set up enough of it's very personal to him. And there's also some really interesting things that happen during this period. Like, Malekith goes to the Shrine of Cain, and he actually faces down the Widowmaker. And what's interesting is, unlike his father, because the Widowmaker is a really fucking crazy weapon, and it takes the shape of what is most appealing to those who see it. And Malekith sees a scepter of rulership, not a sword, but something that Cain is trying to lure him in with. You can be king. You can be all you want to be. And Malekith resists, which is insane.
I think it says a lot to his character that he resists, but I think you can also argue that he resisted, and arguably maybe the way he resisted Adurin, he's reached a point in his life where the gods fuck him.
Yeah, and I think it's
his future.
I think it says kind of deliberately that Malekith looks at it and goes, I won't be your puppet. Like,
yeah,
I know, and Malekith is super interesting because he resents the gods. He does not like any of them. Like Cain, Malekith pays such lip service to Cain, it's not even funny. Where he goes so far as to tell the cult of Cain, "Oh yeah, I am Cain incarnate. I am the incarnate of Cain, and y'all work for me." And Hellebron knows he's bullshitting. She knows he is completely full of crap, but politically she can't move against him, and he also kind of lets them do what they want, so she ignores it. Like, most people would argue in the modern lore, Talaris Dreadbringer is much more accurately the voice. Like, he can hear Cain's voice, literally. And he's off killing people. But like Malekith, for him, it's just politics. He doesn't give a fuck about the gods.
Yeah, quite. The rise of Cain as the primary deity of the Dark Elves comes from the period when there was no other gods for the Dark Elves. It was just Cain. When it was first written. And that the DNA of that has run all the way through to the modern version, where there may be a whole pantheon of gods there for them to be worshipping, and some of them more important than Cain. But because Cain didn't exist beforehand, none of the literature refers to any of those gods. All of the characters and the various units refer to just Cain. So Cain comes up again and again and again and again, and is given an enormous amount of prominence, to the point that it's no longer sensible to a degree.
Yeah, in reality,
the other gods look a bit. Bleh.
Yeah, in reality, it would probably be like each of the Dark Elf cities has a god that they're a little bigger on, as opposed to like Cain being big in all of them. He would probably just be big in Harganeth.
Almost certainly. But we have what we have because of the way it was created.
Yeah, we have to work with it. But there's interesting things to explore there. But like Malekith would do the same with all the cults. He would literally just say, "Yeah, no, I'm big for your god because I'm important, and politically you will support that." Another thing we need to go in with. So Malekith, 3 invasions. They're drag out fights. He holds on to parts of Ulthuan, Nagaryth, and a lot of northern Krace, Tiranoc, for a long time. Like it's not until Tethys the Slayer that they push him out. Big time.
It's worth saying that a lot of people always imagine Ulthuan as being the High Elf land, but for a significant period of its time, it's split 50-50 almost between the Dark Elves and the High Elves. It's not the land of the High Elves, it's the land of the Elves, half of which is ruled by Dark Elves for a massive period of its history.
Yeah, and so it's like a drag out fight, and eventually it builds up to the Great War. And this is a very big moment for Malekith when he finally takes advantage of everything going on with the Everchosen. So Asvar Kul rises up, and the thing about Everchosens that I think a lot of people don't understand, just because of the scope of Warhammer tends to be on the old world, and Everchosen, he physically can only be in one place. But when an Everchosen rises up, chaos goes crazy. It is a global event when an Everchosen happens. And so the Hung and many other tribes full on are ready to invade Nagaroth. And Malekith is able to get them to say, hey, instead of coming after my lands, which don't have many resources and it's not going to be a fun fight and whatever, why don't we go? He
sent up Morathi. She converted most of them.
Yeah. Morathi is able to manipulate them, super easily. And she does this many times. Like she literally does this twice that I can think of like being like, "Oh yeah, no, come work for us. Like, look at all these sexy ladies we got. Come fight for us." And the Hung are like, "Yeah, So they join up with the Dark Elves. So Malekith invades Ulthuan, and this time it's not just the Dark Elves. It's Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen, demons. Like, it is a terrifying army, and the High Elves are overwhelmed. And it's ugly, and he has Nakari with him. He literally binds the demon that dealt the death blow to his father.
Ultimate insult.
Nakari fucking hates Malekith. Nakari hates the line of Anarion. He's tried to wipe it out multiple times, and to Nakari's credit, he's been mostly successful. There's only like 4 of them left, which it was a pretty prolific line. But he binds Nakari, and he literally uses him as a bloodhound, which Nakari fucking hates. Like, Malekith goes out of his way to embarrass Nakari on a regular basis and treat him like a dog. But Nakari is killed by Teclis after he tries to hunt down Tyrion. And then we finally get the Battle of Finneval Plain, where Malekith, by all rights, should have won again, but he literally, essentially a god slaps him down again, but this time it's Lilith. Malekith is wrestling with Teclis. The two of them are having this epic magic duel, and a lot of people think that, like, oh, Teclis is just a better wizard. No, he's not. Teclis is a very powerful wizard, but he is thousands and thousands and thousands of years younger than Malekith. The only reason he can go toe-to-toe with Malekith is the Curse of Cain. The way it affects him is he's physically very frail, but his magic is nuts. And the other reason is that he is wielding some of the wildest fucking
stuff of the Lith itself.
Yeah, he has the staff of a god that gives him one spell that he can just juice. And that's what he does. He literally charges up and he fires like a fucking nuclear bomb at Malekith. And it kills Malekith's dragon, and it should have killed Malekith. But Malekith, like Andy said, played the escape card. Because once again, he comes to a pivotal moment of, will he die or will he flee? And he throws himself into the realm of chaos, which, granted, kind of a risky escape plan. But
it's also worth noting that this was used, particularly back in the older ones. It was used largely as a demonstration of what the escape card did in the first Warhammer Magic box set. But it was also a period where they decided that they would actively change the Witch King's character from being this ravening lunatic who was out of control, who was loosely, without any real structure anymore, utterly obsessed with his destruction of Ulthuan and taking control of it. And he came back a calculating, far more capable and at one with himself person, arguably what would then become the Eternity King at a later date. It was the first step towards that part of his evolution as a character. And it took whatever happened in the Realms of Chaos, where you could argue he was chased by demons. He had great revelations. Who knows what he did? He could have gone off to 40k for all we know. He certainly saw something. And that loosely changed him. And that in later editions wasn't talked about as much, but it was certainly in the DNA of the stories that were told later.
Yeah, so Malekith vanishes for 100 years. And a lot of people think he's dead, but his most loyal servants don't. And Morathi refuses to believe he could possibly die. And she goes through a whole bunch of shit, but she eventually figures out he's going to come back, and she waits for him. Sure enough, he turns up. He is not in good shape. Mentally, physically, and emotionally, being in the realm of chaos is really bad for you. It's not a good place. Plus, it's very heavily implied that Nakari was hunting him the entire time, because Nakari was very upset about the whole Bloodhound thing, and wanted his revenge. And Malekith somehow got away from him and even broke off one of his horns and brought it with him, which is hilarious. But Malekith spends 3 years in the healing coma.
It's worth noting that when Malekith was away in the Realms of Chaos, from his perspective, it was literally an eternity. So he's no longer a 6,000 year or 7,000 year old elf. He is arguably millennia beyond that old in terms of his overall sensation of experience. He's arguably by this point the oldest character in the Warhammer world.
Yeah, fucky wucky
beyond demons,
chaos
beyond
stuff.
Demons that are eternal.
Yeah. And when he gets back, he is genuinely completely different. Like, he spends 3 years healing because he's insane. But and Morathi, once again, whole potions thing, she nurses him back to health. And when he emerges, he is the finale Malekith. He is very cold and calculating, and he's significantly less interested in revenge and more about victory. It's not a personal vendetta anymore. It's more of I think he views it more as a resolution that needs to occur, because he's also seen chaos. Like, he literally faces down, in some ways, the dark gods, sees horrible things, and he knows what chaos is, which is a very rare thing characters get to experience.
Yep.
And
he's just different now. And his perspective on everything is different. But interestingly, the way he's written is not so different. Over the course of the next 200 years, he doesn't actually do things that differently. He doesn't approach things that differently. It's almost like the writers kind of forgot that he went through this great change, but then retract back on it and go, no, what? Actually, no, he did. And then we hit the end times.
Yeah, but what's interesting in 8th edition, Malekith doesn't really do anything
No,
after he
not
comes
at all.
back.
It's
Like
really weird.
Yeah, he blows up. To his credit, he completely wipes out Tor Elisor, which is a pretty serious accomplishment. But other than that,
if you consider some of the previous cities he'd blown up in the past, it's not that major.
yeah, but it's and granted, you can hand wave it of he's plotting.
Yeah. I mean,
but,
what's 200 years to an elf?
Yeah, and the end times happens. And the end times is very controversial. This is something we have to talk with Andy about live on stream, because there is a lot of people hate the end times.
Yep.
I hate the end times. Andy hates the end times.
I do.
But not everything that happened at the end times was completely illogical. A lot of that had been set up in Warhammer Fantasy's bones.
Yes.
And Malekith is one of those things. And that's a hard truth for a lot of us to swallow because of the way it was written.
I agree.
And for me personally, like I will tell you, the first time I talked to Andy about Malekith and we kind of brought up the Eternity King, I did not like what he had to say on the subject. But over the course of our conversations, I have come to very much like what he has to say on the subject, in which that I would like to give Andy the floor now to explain the idea behind what Malekith is supposed to be when the end times hits.
Okay, well, there's lots of different angles we could take here, but let's keep it simple given the hour. Because we have been doing this for what, about 3 hours now?
Yeah, we need to wrap up soon.
Yeah, so we need to wrap up at some point. But we've been hinting at it throughout the course of the stream, and that's that Malekith was, as far as the basic process of being king, Phoenix King, in that he went in, he came out. You could argue he didn't pass through. You could argue that he failed a judgment of Azurin. You could argue that he himself refused Azurin. There's lots of things you can argue. But he went in, he came out, and all the other ones didn't do it right. So there's some arguments. But ultimately, his job was to get over himself. His job was to realize he was wrong. His job was from the point when he started off right at the beginning, and Azurin said, this is what you have to be. And Malekith said, no, and then refused it. He had to take that on board, pass through the flame again, and accept what he was, and effectively, for the first time in his life, submit. And by doing so, he could bind the elves back together and accept that Azurin, as the judge at the very top, he who has the bifurcated mask, white on one side, black on the other, he who represents the entire mandala, not just one side as the Azure pretended, not the other side as the Dark Elves pretended, but the entire mandala of what it was to be an elf. He had to be the representation. It's a long play story that starts with him first passing through that flame and failing to realize what he had to be, that was eventually paid off at the end. Now, do I like the way that they did that? My perspective, no. I not only didn't like the way they rushed it, I didn't like the way the Wood Elves went, yeah, sure, you're my king. Not a problem. Screw that. They're so different to what they used to be. That would not be an easy, hey, here comes our king. Yeah, no. Do I like large parts of it? No, but I do like that at the core, there was a real attempt to get a strong idea of what Malekith was, should have been, could have been, and ultimately at the heart of it, what the Curse of Cain represented. Do I like what Tyrion became? No, not really. Do I like what Teclis came out of this? No, not really.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely, and I think the important thing to walk away from, because and for those in chat, because I think you'll enjoy this, we will eventually do a shit on the end time stream because it'll be fun.
It will, because there's a lot of good in there.
Yeah, like we'll talk about the fun bits, the dumb bits, and have a good time with it. But I think the thing for Malekith that's really important that I'd like Andy to expand on a little bit further, actually, before I go into my thing, is what would you say is the way the Curse of Cain revealed itself within Malekith? Like, what aspect did it take? If you had to pick something.
If I pin it down in one word, pride. That's probably not the answer you were looking for. What is it you were looking for? Because you clearly have something you're looking for there. So I'll expand on that. Because pride is at the core of all of his failures. You know, he refused the god, arguably.
Yeah, and the thing about Malekith that I love a lot about him is that, and I think it ties very heavily into the Eternity King, is that Malekith in essence was kind of destined to be like the ultimate elf.
Yeah.
And even like better than his father in a lot of ways, because his father was very much ruled by grief, and his father was also forged out of desperation as opposed to anything else. And Malekith had a little bit of a luxury to avoid that, but it kind of blew up in his face. In that without the desperation, he faltered. And I think the thing that really strikes me about him is that one of the things I did like about the end times, though, and the Eternity King plot, though, once again, they didn't have nearly enough time to develop it truly, was that when he finally becomes the Eternity King, he is so marred by the journey he took to become the Eternity King that, like, he acknowledges that there are things he doesn't need to do anymore, and there are things that he needs to discard because he needs to be balanced. But it is like a black pit on his soul.
Can you bring up the previous comment? Because I'd like to say a little thing on that, and also say the one thing that I think they should have done. So was he wrong, though? And I think the answer is no. In that his refusal of the gods wasn't necessarily wrong. What was wrong was his refusal of what it was to be an elf. You could argue that the gods said you have to be this, and he completely denied that god and thus denied half of what it was to be an elf in general. So that would make him wrong, arguably. And I was going to say one last thing. To make him a true Phoenix King, if they wanted to really pay that story off well, he should have been reborn when he came out of that flame. He should have been reborn. The whole point of
Andy, they would have had to make another model.
Well, yes, they would have. And goddamn right they should have. Because he should have been reborn. Because that was the point when he changed. He actually became something new. He was reborn. That's the whole point of Azurin. The rebirth from the corrupt, broken, old version into this completely new version. The ashes burned away, and he should have walked out resplendent. Being the Eternity King, being, in truth, not the Eternity King, just simply the Phoenix King.
Yeah.
That's what he should have been. He should have come out as a Phoenix King. The great holy phoenixes of Azurin themselves should have tumbled out of that flame. There should have been a great call, and elves across the world would have known their king had finally come. It took thousands of years to get there. They broke the world themselves, but finally, in these last moments, as the last battle comes, the king strides again, and that would have been great.
Yeah, and they wanted to do that. There are threads of it, but it just didn't stick the landing.
It didn't quite stick the landing. Yeah, totally.
But for anyone out there that like is like just for funsies or like just thinking of mental exercises, there's a lot of fun to be explored there of like, and the end times kind of tries to touch on it of like, that would have been Malekith. He would have been the new Phoenix King and kind of in a ways had earned it at that point. Yeah. But he would have very much been haunted about all the things he'd done.
Yes.
There would have been elf factions that, although we're not like Tyrion crazy, like insane like Tyrion was, they would have looked at him and said, no, like, and absolutely not.
That's why he could have become the Phoenix King, though, because he could have felt guilt. He would have realized that what he'd done was wrong. And it wasn't until he could accept that he was wrong that he could get over his pride, that he could become the true king that he was supposed to be. He had to reach the point where he could go, I am wrong. And that would have made, if anything, a far better king, the king who no longer wanted to be king, because he realized how flawed he was to his very core. And that is why he was finally in a position where he could properly rule. It's a beautiful potential story, but as we said, it kind of frittered out at the end.
Yeah, well, there's like those threads are there. Like I know people are like, oh no, Tyrion should have been king, but it's like Tyrion would have literally just been an Aryan again.
Yeah,
Tyrion would have been a king driven by desperation, who goes mad due to grief and does some and loses himself to it. That is Tyrion's story. Is that he is a literal mirror of an Aryan, which kind of in some ways makes an interesting fight between him and Malekith, and that Malekith literally has to fight his father.
Yeah, and I think ultimately what should have happened with Tyrion was that he was killed in the most ultimately awesome way, much like an Aryan was. He should have gone out trying to save the world.
Yeah,
that should have been his last charge, his last stand, and his brother should have been looking on, weeping in horror at what his brother was doing, and that would have been awesome. It would have made a great story, and you could have seen his dad.
You didn't like him getting shot in the back? and then being resurrected later, and they're like, oh yeah, no, all the Kane stuff, it's fine. You're light now. Don't worry about it.
Did I like that? Let's say it wasn't my preferred part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So, Mr. Jim, I think you do bring up an interesting point, but I think the thing is that it's important to understand that Malekith would need to be the ultimate embodiment of understanding the flaws of the elves and acknowledging them and having to face them. Whereas a lot of the elves, there are characters that you look at, you go, oh, well, this character doesn't have any problems. Like, this character's awesome, so they should be king. But the point is that they haven't gone through those sufferings, and they're, in a sense, underdeveloped. Like, looking at like, they're, the thing about elves that I think is really important is a lot of the best elf characters are characters that go through a profound tragedy or a profound experience that ends up greatly affecting them and turning them into someone else. And they go, okay, I understand what my place is now.
Yeah, he would have been not the best choice as far as everyone was concerned, but the best choice for the day. He was the one who could have led them into the end times.
It's totally valid to hate Malekith as the Phoenix King. Like, it's totally valid to look at his story and to go, no, the atrocities were too great. I hate him. That's
why it's such a good choice in many respects. It's because he's such a divisive figure and would be for his own people too. The fact that he himself would agree with you, that is what would make him such a great figure in that place. If he was someone that disagreed with you and thought, no, I'm the best king, I can do this, I'm better, he would have learned nothing. He would not be the potential character that he could have been. That's why I like him as the Eternity King. I hate the name, but I like him as the Phoenix King. The Ever Queen and the Eternity.
Well, they were like, we've got to make it feel more special for some stupid reason. But it's and I think that's the thing is a lot of people go, oh, well, that doesn't feel like super satisfying. It's like, well, it only doesn't feel satisfying if you're looking at it of good versus evil. Like, the best aspects of Warhammer are that it's muddy as fuck. In real life, like a lot of ways, and that not everything has a satisfying conclusion. There's often,
I would actually argue it's super satisfying. What wasn't satisfying was the landing. Because you didn't pin because the landing wasn't pinned, because everything that it could have been wasn't explained, you're just left with a, you know what? I like Malekith. He's the king now. Oh, he rules all the elves. Why does he rule? Why do they all accept it? Because they are. He's a bit bad. Yeah, whatever. The end.
And there was a lot of weird decisions to try and justify it, as far as like, oh no, Ashurin always wanted him to be king, and he was murdering the Phoenix Kings, and it's like that's stupid. That doesn't make sense. Like, oh, what happened to Malekith's wife?
It's sad.
Yeah, real quick. So this happened before Malekith Battle of Finneval Plain. This happens about 3,000-ish years before that. But it's after Malekith's gone to Nagaroth. It's after the War of the Beard, a ways after that. So Alisara is one of the big, awesome wizards in Athel-Loren. She's not the greatest one. That would probably be Ariel, Naiath the Prophetess, but she's up there. And she learns about what's happened to Malekith, and she starts feeling really, really bad because she still loves him. Like, she's always loved him. She didn't leave because she didn't love him. She left because she was scared. And prophecy got the better of her. And then she heard the call of Athel-Loren and she answered it. Because Athel-Loren, it's a little creepy, but it kind of compelled a lot of the elves to come to it because of a bargain that an old Everqueen made. But in any event, she comes to the decision that she wants to go back to Malekith's side. She still loves him, and she hopes she learns about what he's doing, and she's heartbroken, and she goes, I need to go be with my husband. Like, I need to try and bring him back to the man I knew instead of the man he is. I bet there's still good in him. And the problem is that she's not the only one that believes that. Morathi agrees. And Morathi finds out about Alisara's coming back, because Alisara like sends out, Ariel is like, I don't want you to leave because you're my sister. And she says, no, I have to go. So they send a little secret missive to Malekith, and Malekith's like, all right, I'll send a secret ship to pick you up, because he loves her. He wants her to come back. And Morathi finds out, because Morathi always knows what's going on with her son. And so she sets up a fairly elaborate ploy and tricks a disgraced high elf noble to go assassinate Alisara.
Yep.
And Elisara dies because Morathi wants Malekith to be ruthless. She wants him to be what he needs to be in order for them to succeed. And she fears that if Elisara returns, that it will soften Malekith and that he will become kind of complacent. That he might care more about living a good life with Elisara and less focused on becoming the Phoenix King.
Yeah, you can view this as basically a war between two seers. You've got the wife on one side and the mother on the other, both of whom have seen a future where Malekith could be something terrible or something good, and both of whom are playing a bunch of cards to try and turn them into the Malekith that they want. And Morathi wins.
Yeah, so Elisara dies, though there is, for anyone that's like, wow, that fucking sucks, I hate Morathi, she does kind of get her just desserts of that Malekith finds out that his mother killed Elisara, and he's pissed. He leaves Morathi to die, which is actually kind of surprising for him. He finds out that Ariel and Orion have found out who is responsible, so they come and lay siege to Tower of Grand. They lay siege to Grand, and Morathi says, Malekith, there are two demigods or gods that are trying to kill me. Please come help. And Malekith not only says no, he sends out an edict forbidding anyone else to go help her. So he's like, nope. You
on your head be it.
Yeah, you dug this grave, you can fucking lie in it, Mom.
Totally.
Luckily for Morathi, she does not die because she convinces Ariel to let her go in exchange for dark magic knowledge, which has a profound impact on many futures. But anyway, yeah, so that's what happens to her. She dies, and it's genuinely sad. And Malekith mourns her. He does.
He does. And I think that speaks a lot to Malekith's character as well. But yes, this is where Morathi, again, much as we mentioned earlier in the stream, she plays her cards very carefully, and no matter how terrible her actions may be, she believes they're justified to ensure that she gets the best for her son, and she believes this is the best for her son.
Andy, I told you.
Yeah, it did come. So I'm going to address this one and say that it very much was a part of the lore. It was not just a part of the lore, as in was it hinted at here or there. It was not just hinted at; it was very much part and parcel of what the case was, and that was to try and show that the elves aren't human. The concept of incest doesn't really necessarily mean the same to them as it does to us. They don't have the same genetic problems that humanity have. If they married their brother and they had a child, there wouldn't be genetic issues. They don't have the same sense of morals as we do. But as consumers and as humans, we have those morals. And when we look at it as a bunch of consumers, we get often horrified, particularly given that Games Workshop are touting these products to children often. That is an unacceptable line, so it gets pretty much shoved under the carpet, while simultaneously everyone knows, that's what pretty much is behind the scenes, and that's often always what it has been. It's one of the ways that Morathi has always manipulated her son. And that continued on to when he was slapped in the armor for a variety of different reasons, because there's far more than just the simple ha 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 sex sex sex. You've just got to remember these are elves with a different moral compass and a completely different physiological compass to the one that we have as humans. But we are reading and writing this as humans with our own sense of moral outrage getting flung in here. So you'll never find that probably ever turning up again. Indeed, you will often find them probably not just brushing it under the carpet, but saying that definitely never happened. I take a relatively sanguine view. I think it's a good way, potentially, of showing how they're different for adult media.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily adult media.
Yeah, I would say that it's fair to assume there were probably relations between them. You could very much argue that after Malekith gets put in the armor, he literally can't feel pleasure anymore, so he stops caring and that ends. That would be a fair interpretation, I think, of events. To wrap up just the last few things, the situation between Snorri Whitebeard and Malekith. Yes, that is dramatic. Malekith's breaking of his oath to Snorri literally breaks reality a little bit because it brings Snorri back from death. Snorri becomes an ancestor god in the full god sense. He becomes the god of vengeance. He literally is the ancestor god of vengeance. And he becomes the White Dwarf, and he literally roams around avenging oaths. As far as like what he does, he's a spirit of vengeance. Now, a lot of people have wondered, why didn't he go after Malekith? I would suggest that I don't think Snorri was as much himself, as he is more a god at that point. He's more of a representation of an idea.
Almost a spirit rather than a dwarf.
Yeah, that being said, I do think if the End Times had the time to develop Malekith's story, I do think there should have been a very interesting confrontation between the two of them when Malekith returns to the old world.
Yeah. Now, if I was writing, I'd have had him kill Malekith and thus be potentially responsible for the end of the Warhammer world.
That would have been a very dwarf thing to do.
Yeah, it would have been the ultimate. It would have been the ultimate figure of potential savior of the Warhammer world, Malekith. Everyone would have considered him to be the last option to be any use at all. But him forging the most unlikely alliances and then Grombrindle chopping his fucking head off for being an oathbreaker.
Honestly, if the way that the whole scene with Manfred and Gelt and stuff, if that instead had happened, if it had been Malekith helping contain the Chaos Portal, and then stories like an oath is an oath and he kills him, that would have been fucking insane.
It would have been insane.
In a good way. In a great way.
Yeah, and it would have been insane in a way that made sense for the long lore that they had already established between the pair of them. And it would have also made sense for just bringing the fucking White Dwarf front and center in it, because that's just kind of fucking cool.
Yeah, obviously, part of the question that was asked, obviously, I don't think me and Andy are fans of the way they handled Grombrindle in the End Times, where he saves Malekith and then just fucks off. He wouldn't have done that.
Nah,
that's a human thing to do, not a dwarf thing to do.
It's a really human thing to do. And I think that's, I think if I was going to sum up all of the issues that I have with the End Times, it is that they never really thought of them as real individuals that were living and breathing inside a desperate situation. What they thought of them was a bunch of names that they had to somehow sort through, kill, and keep a few for the next step. And that was a massive underserving of what was a great setting. The End Times were not necessarily the wrong choice for Games Workshop. Clearly, it was the right choice for Games Workshop.
Yeah,
but I don't think it was implemented.
It didn't have to be written like that.
It didn't.
Yeah, and granted, there's a lot there of like they were, I think, far more concerned with setting up for Age of Sigmar than they were with ending fantasy, which informed a lot of poor decisions. And they also were like, well, we don't want to make new minis because that costs money, so we're not going to give these characters proper ends. But whatever. Last few things. Be'lakor, what do I think about Grombrindle being in Naggaroth? I think it's fantastic. I think the whole point of his campaign being you go after Malekith, perfect.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's fine. Love it.
Any other last second questions, people? We are literally coming up to the very last end. I do want to take a moment to say, if this conversation is, I'm going to do some, what do you call it? Peddling?
Pedal on.
I do want to say that if this has all sounded super interesting, if you're like, wow, this is super awesome, I've loved this discussion, this is really cool, this has been a lot of fun, and you really have enjoyed a lot of the chat about elves, one of the things I cannot recommend highly enough is, goofy as it may sound, I'm not being paid for this. I want to make that clear. I'm not being paid for it. I'm not a part of it. I am paying for it to be as good as it can be, is Lawhammer. Please, for the love of God, check out Lawhammer, watch the series, start on the first episode and just go through it. Andy is doing an insane job of kind of expanding the lore and exploring it in a way that allows it to you to see play by play what's happening. And it's insanely incredible. Alamenowith really allows you to explore the Lorelorn elves, which the way
Andy to Malekith and has in fact met him, but I haven't told you that.
Spoilers. But the way Andy handles it is the Lorelorn elves are the closest thing there are to the true elves, and it's fascinating, and it gives them a thing to do. They are not just wood elves that are not in Athel-Loren, which doesn't make sense. It literally wouldn't make any fucking sense if that's what they were. Because the whole point of Athel-Loren and the Wood Elves is Athel-Loren. Mm-hmm. That's what matters. So for there to be Wood Elves outside of Athel-Loren is super weird.
Yeah, they have to exist for a reason.
Yeah. So the idea is that the idea that Andy really takes, like, it's introduced in Wolfrup, but Andy really takes it to a whole nother level, is that they are the true elves. As close to what's left of the true elves. Now, they have a fuck ton of problems. And they have many of the flaws that the original elves did, but it's phenomenal.
Big style.
Yeah, actually, like I just finished an episode about Gerhardt and Alamenowith that was very funny in a lot of ways, but it's like, man, which she's played by Andy's wife Lindsay Law, and she does an insanely good job. We have a Lorebeards episode about playing elves with her because she does such a perfect job of being a character that I love and also just want to smack. Which is like, that's what an elf is that you should love and hate them. Because
I think you'll enjoy her individual episode because there is a smack moment.
Yeah, it's like they are such asses. But it's great. It's awesome. But
so I have a couple of things I'd like to add to that. And that is, firstly, I completely agree with literally everything that the good old Loremaster of Sotek says over there.
Really?
And I think you should all watch our game because we play Warhammer a little bit differently to everyone else, and it's a big laugh. It's at low hammering wherever the hell you have.
It's Critical Role in Warhammer. It's Critical Role in Warhammer.
That's pretty much what we're aiming for. But I'll also add, because I'm almost at the point where I'm going to release it, on the elf front, we're running elves a little bit differently to how they're normally run in the roleplay game, where they're often just perceived as humans with pointy ears. And I'm writing a complete set of rules that are just for the elves, that revolve around all of the gods and the different ways that those gods say that the elves should partake of their lives, and speak directly to this entire stream. Speak to Anarion, speak to Malekith, and why they are the way they are, why Orion is the way he is, why Ariel is the way that she is, why all of them are the way they are. And these path rules will be popping up relatively soon, and they'll be dribbling out over the course of multiple weeks. And I think for those of you who are big lore fans, you're going to find an awful lot of rather cool elfy goodness in there that might really get you going. So yes, that. And on the second one, if you just like chatting about gaming in general, go check out our Rookery streams at Rookery Publications or at Rookery, wherever we're about. You'll find my name in there somewhere. Do come along. There must be links in the chat somewhere on Twitch.
If you're on Twitch, Nightbot has been posting it all the time.
Yeah,
and if
thanks, Nightbot. You rock.
If you're in YouTube, it's in the description.
Perfect. So yeah,
those are up. You can
we
already
have a bajillion videos you can look through, and on all topics. So there might not be anything immediately jumps out the first 4 or 5, but if you check back to the old ones, there's going to be tons of stuff, including our good friend Loremaster over here.
Yeah,
we had a good chat over there in the room.
Yeah, I'm going to keep stroking Andy off here. Of that, the Rookery does amazing interviews with writers, many of which you'll recognize. Writers, artists, map makers, all sorts of people. The one they did yesterday, fucking awesome. I got to submit some good questions. They did a whole episode. I forget his name off the top of my head.
That was Adrian Tchaikovsky, wasn't it?
Yes. Tchaikovsky. Yeah. Such a fucking. I hate how badass his last name is. I wish my last name was that badass. They did a kind of episode featuring around writing inhuman species. And if you are like, man, I would really like to write lizardmen better or understand lizardmen better, holy shit, does he like kill that question?
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, like I'm aware of his novels. I've read some of his novels, and he like knows his shit. He does some awesome answers. Like he talks about like dealing with immortality and like all these other things. So if you're ever like, I want to play an elf, but I don't want to, because like the biggest bitch that I have with Warhammer Fantasy, and I think Andy does too, that it suffers from, is people like to forget that elves and dwarves are not humans.
Really bugs me.
They are completely separate species that are insanely alien to us. They are not us. Like the closest thing to us are halflings, and they're pretty far removed as well. They're not like us. They're not remotely related to us. The old ones did not use the same sugar, spice, and everything nice to make them as they did us, for very deliberate reasons. Like I would say the elves, really and truly, the elves are as alien to us as the lizardmen are in a lot of ways. It's just not as physically obvious because they're also mammals.
You easily forget it because you look at them, you're like, oh, look at them, they're pretty humans.
Hell,
no.
if you're like, I want to, but they look the same. No, they don't. Go look at 6th edition black and white art to see like amazing elf art. Elves do not. They have crazy, scary eyes, and they're weirdly slender. And like, anyway, last little. I'm just checking for any last second questions.
There's a couple posted over in Discord. Let's see if there's any obvious that worth looking at.
Oh yeah.
Nope.
If they're not super relevant, you can just skip them.
That's exactly what I'm doing right now.
We love you, Professor Pone.
Favorite Malekith moment. My favorite Malekith moment is a part that wasn't written, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, what really goes on in that flame. Beyond what they say that happened, that's my favorite Malekith moment because I think it is pivotal for understanding his character.
My favorite Malekith moment that I think demonstrates like his cruelty as far as like making sure he himself survives and doesn't give a damn is when Epidemius, the big bad Tallyman of Nurgle himself, the super lesser demon special character, showed up in Nagaron and was like, Malekith, you have a debt to pay. I've come to collect, because Malekith makes a lot of bargains with demons to further his own power. And a big fight breaks out, and Malekith realizes he can't get rid of Epidemius because he is very difficult to kill, and he's just got a bunch of Nurgle guys, and they're just like, we'll just sit here and infect you. So Malekith bargains 1,000 Dark Elf souls in exchange to settle his debt, and Epidemius is like, done. And it's like, damn, Malekith is fucking cold, dude.
One last one there was, have I seen the Dark Elf faction trailer in Total War Warhammer 2? And what did I think of Malekith's portrayal and voice? So I found Malekith's voice to be exactly what everyone would sort of expect, in that it was boomy and look at me in my armor, and I'm sort of English. It felt much like most of Total War Warhammer's elves, very human.
Yeah.
And I found that, particularly with Marathi chatting away, her part as well was superhuman. For me, I think I would have tried to very much make him appear either one of two extremes. One, broken, or on the other side, so, you know, proper Darth Vader, broken, wheezy, I'm melting inside, actually awful, but with an underpinning of alienness, or on the other side, beautiful. You can hear the Phoenix King to come coming through it, but the twisted bitterness in his tone coming through would have been, I think, much more interesting. But instead, they went for almost a standard boom, 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 deep voice, nasty, boom, 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 which was fine.
Yeah,
I felt they could have gone elsewhere.
It would have been nice to see them lean into, like, he is in agony. Like, he is always in pain. Like, he moves through sheer force of fucking will.
You just imagine him screaming through everything that he's doing. And,
you know, they went for, like, we want him to be as badass as possible, which, you know, fine. It's a fight. It's, you know,
but it was
it's a fighting
such a
game.
bland badass. Where I would have loved him to almost epitomize that rage and that power that he has and has to have to exist. That would have been quite fun.
Yeah, one of these days, have you ever seen the chaos oh my gosh, Mark of Chaos. Have you ever seen the Mark of Chaos moment with Malekith? Yeah. That's even sillier. Like, the Malekith cutscene, they were like, we need his voice to be the basest bass that ever based. It's so silly. Anywho, thank you all. Follow-up question. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll Cash Letter, I'll answer that personally, because that's fine. Okay, cool. Thank you all so much for watching. This is way over time. So we hope you all enjoyed yourselves. We hope you had a lot of fun. We will be back next week with something else. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do yet. We might do gods. We might do another character. I saw someone asking about Manfred, and I'm like, ooh, that's a good one. But we might try and we might try and have it like a character and then a subject and then a character and then a subject.
That way, idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, that way it's kind of a mix. So thank you all so much for joining us. Once again, if you haven't checked it out, you can find links all over the place. Check out Lawhammer and all that stuff. I'm about to start doing, I'm not exactly sure I'm going to format it yet, but I'm about to start doing streams where I'm going to just be talking about Lawhammer stuff, because the lore implications are fucking wild and I'm having a lot of fun with it. And I really want to explore those so that Andy can just watch them and laugh about how we're all wrong or making weird assumptions. But yeah, thank you again for being here. Andy, any last little things before we go?
Malekith is awesome. Ignore the propaganda.
Yes, and once again, the lore is, at the end of the day, what you want it to be.
Totally.
Like, we obviously kind of know our shit in a sense, but Games Workshop, as much as it's a goofy sentence, canon is whatever you want it to be. So, like, allow this to inform your world about Malekith, but do your own explorations. Have fun with it.
Yeah, we almost certainly skipped a whole ton of shit we could have said.
Yeah. Like,
but Malekith's agent.
Yeah, and yeah.
All the atrocities. All the atrocities.
So
take that, Iron Writ.
Okay, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.